A gunshot split the night. Ayla Nakoa collapsed in the dust, blood soaking her torn buckskin, wolves circling closer with every ragged breath she took. She'd run for miles through the desert with a bullet wound in her side, hunted by men who wanted her silenced and beasts that smelled her dying. Then a shadow stepped into the firelight, a white man with a rifle, scarred hands, and eyes that had seen too much killing. He fired once. The lead wolf dropped. Ayla looked up at her savior and saw the enemy. This is the story of two people the world tried to destroy, who saved each other when neither believed they deserved saving. If you want to see how far a story can travel, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Let's see where this tale ends up. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Ayla learned that long before the night she was supposed to die. She'd been running for 3 days, maybe 4. Time blurred when your body was eating itself to stay alive. Her side burned where the bullet had torn through, just above her hip, and every step sent fresh blood seeping into the deerskin wrap she'd tied around it with shaking hands. The cloth was black now, stiff with dried blood and dirt. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Away from the settlement where she'd been cornered. Away from the men who'd tried to drag her into a wagon because a half-breed Apache woman traveling alone was either property or a problem, and they'd decided she was both. Away from the gunfire that had erupted when she'd fought back, clawing at faces, biting down hard enough to taste copper and rage. One of them had shot her as she ran. She didn't stop. Now stumbling through a canyon she didn't recognize under a moon so bright it hurt to look at, Ayla could hear them behind her. Not the men. Those bastards had given up miles ago, probably figured the desert would finish what they started. No, what followed her now was worse. Wolves. She'd heard them an hour ago, distant howls echoing off the rock walls. Now they were close enough that she could hear their paws on stone, the wet panting of tongues lolling between teeth that could snap bone. They were stalking her, waiting for her to fall. Here's the thing about being hunted. You start to understand the animal inside yourself. The part that doesn't think, doesn't plan, just moves. Ayla's legs were numb, her vision narrowing to a tunnel of dust and shadow, but she kept going because stopping meant dying, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Not like this. She rounded a bend and her boot caught on a rock. She went down hard, palms scraping across stone, and the pain in her side flared so bright she couldn't breathe. For a second, everything went white. When her vision cleared, they were there. 5 of them, maybe 6. Hard to count with the world tilting sideways. Gray shapes moving through the dark, eyes catching the moonlight like little coins. The biggest one, a male, scarred across the muzzle, stepped forward. His lips pulled back and she saw the teeth. Ayla dragged herself upright. Her hand found the knife at her belt, the one her brother had made for her before he died. The blade was short, barely longer than her palm, but it was sharp, and it was all she had. "Come on," she rasped. Her voice didn't sound like hers anymore. "Come on, then." The wolf took another step, and then the night exploded. The gunshot was so loud it seemed to crack the sky open. The lead wolf jerked sideways and collapsed, a dark hole blown through its ribs. The pack scattered, yelping, vanishing into the rocks like smoke. Ayla spun, knife raised, and saw him. A man. White, tall, but not in a way that made him seem strong, more like something that had been stretched too thin and never quite bounced back. He was holding a rifle, smoke still curling from the barrel, and he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. His face was all angles and shadows, stubble covering a jaw that looked like it had been broken and badly set. His clothes were patched, sun-faded, the kind of worn that came from years, not days. And his eyes? She'd seen eyes like that before. On men who'd killed and kept killing until they forgot why they started. "Drop it," she said, lifting the knife higher. He didn't move. Just stood there, rifle lowered now, watching her like she was a half-wild dog that might bite or might run. After a long moment, he shook his head. "You're bleeding out," he said. His voice was rough, low, like he didn't use it much. "You've got maybe an hour before you're done. Maybe less." "I didn't ask you." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He turned and started walking. Not toward her, just away, up the canyon path like she wasn't even there. Ayla stood there, swaying, her pulse hammering in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away from this man, this white man with a rifle and a face full of ghosts. But her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She took one step, then another, and then the ground rushed up and smacked her in the face. Black. When she woke up, she was moving, not walking, being carried. Strong arms under her shoulders and knees, the smell of leather and sweat and wood smoke. She tried to struggle, but her body wouldn't listen. Everything felt distant, wrapped in cotton. "Stop," the man's voice said, close to her ear. "You'll tear it open again." She forced her eyes open. The world was upside down, stars wheeling overhead, canyon walls sliding past in dark stripes. He was carrying her like she weighed nothing, his face set and unreadable, jaw tight. "Put me down," she managed. "No. I'll kill you." "Later," he said. Then the darkness pulled her under again. Ipangcham. She woke to firelight. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The ceiling was wrong, wooden beams, not canvas or sky. The air smelled like smoke and something sharper, medicinal. Her side throbbed, a deep ache that pulsed with her heartbeat, but the tearing agony was gone. Ayla sat up fast, too fast, and her vision grayed out. She gritted her teeth, waiting for it to pass, and looked down. Someone had stripped off her bloodied shirt and wrapped her torso in clean cloth. The bandage was tight, professional, the kind of work you learned in a war. The cabin was small. One room, stone fireplace on the far wall, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs. Shelves lined with jars and tins. A bedroll in the corner, neatly rolled. No decoration, no softness. It was a place built for function, not comfort. And sitting by the fire, cleaning his rifle with a rag, was the man who'd saved her. He didn't look up when she moved, but she saw his shoulders shift, aware, ready. "Where am I?" she asked. "My home." He set the rifle aside, slow and deliberate, making sure she saw his hands. "Canyon about 15 miles north of the Salt River. No one comes here." "Why not?" "Because I live here." She studied him. In the firelight, he looked older than she'd thought. Maybe 40, maybe less. Hard to tell with a face that worn. His hair was dark, shot through with gray at the temples, tied back with a strip of leather. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, the kind of scars you got from hitting things that hit back. "You were cavalry," she said. It wasn't a question. She could see it in the way he moved, the way he dressed her wound, the rifle that was U.S. Army issue, even if the insignia had been filed off. He didn't answer right away, just stared into the fire like it might tell him something useful. "Was," he said finally. "And now?" "Now I'm not." Ayla pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the way the room tilted. Her legs shook, but they held. She spotted her knife on the table 5 feet away. Too far. He could reach the rifle faster. "I'm leaving," she said. "You won't make it to the canyon mouth. Not your problem. It is if you die 50 yards from my door." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something flicker in those flat eyes. "I didn't drag you here to watch you kill yourself out of pride." "Then why did you?" The question hung in the air. He didn't answer, just stood up, slow, and moved to the shelves. He pulled down a jar of something that looked like dried meat, another with cornmeal, and set them on the table. "Eat," he said. "Rest. Leave when you can walk without falling over. I don't care which way you go after that." "I don't want your help." "Good," he said flatly. "I'm not offering it. I'm just not interested in burying you." She wanted to spit at him, wanted to grab her knife and make him regret every choice that led to this moment. But her body was a traitor, and it was screaming for food, for water, for sleep. She hated that. Hated needing anything from anyone, especially from a man who wore the shape of every enemy she'd ever known. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about survival. It doesn't care about your pride. She sat down at the table. He set a tin plate in front of her, not looking at her, not speaking. She ate in silence, tearing at the dried venison with her teeth, washing it down with water from a clay cup. It tasted like dust and blood and staying alive. He sat across from her and didn't eat, just watched the fire, his face unreadable. "What's your name?" she asked, surprising herself. He hesitated. "Rowan? That your real name?" "It's the one I use." "Fair enough. She'd been using Nakoa since she left her father's people, even though it wasn't her birth name either. Names were just words you wore until they fit. I'm Ayla, she said. He nodded once. Didn't smile, didn't soften, just acknowledged the information like she'd told him the weather. Why'd you shoot the wolf? She asked. It was going to kill you. So? White men kill Apache women all the time. Why'd you care? Something crossed his face then, too quick to name. He looked away. I didn't, he said quietly. I just didn't want to hear it happen. The honesty of it hit her harder than an insult would have. She set down the cup and leaned back, studying him. There was a story there, carved into every line of that face, written in the scars on his hands and the way he sat like he was waiting for something to come through the door and finish him off. Who are you running from? She asked. Everyone, he said. Then, after a pause, who shot you? Men who thought I belonged to them. Did you? No? He nodded, like that made sense to him, like he understood the shape of that particular fight. They sat in silence after that. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the canyon, making the stones sing. It was the kind of quiet that felt too big to fill with words, so they didn't try. Eventually, Ayla's eyes started to close on their own. Rowan stood and gestured to the bedroll. Take it, he said. Where will you sleep? I don't. He picked up the rifle and moved to the door, stepping out into the night. I'll be outside. Yell if you need something. He closed the door behind him before she could argue. Ayla stared at the empty space where he'd been, then at the bedroll, then at the knife still sitting on the table within reach. Every nerve in her body told her to stay awake, to watch the door, to be ready. But exhaustion was stronger than fear. She lay down, pulled the rough blanket over herself, and let the darkness take her. She woke to the smell of coffee. Dawn light was filtering through the cracks in the shutters, pale and thin. Rowan was at the table, pouring black liquid from a battered pot into 2 tin cups. He slid one toward her without a word. Ayla sat up, testing her body. The pain was still there, but duller, manageable. She took the cup and drank. It was strong enough to strip paint, bitter enough to make her teeth ache. How long was I out? She asked. 10 hours, maybe 12. She looked down at the bandage, then back at him. You changed this? No. He nodded toward a basket on the shelf, full of clean cloth strips. I left supplies, figured you'd want to do it yourself. She did, but the fact that he'd known that without her saying it, that he'd thought about what she'd want instead of just doing what was easier, that surprised her. She finished the coffee in silence, then stood and moved to the basket. He turned his back without being asked, staring out the window while she unwrapped the old bandage and inspected the wound. It looked better than she'd expected. Clean, the edges starting to close. He'd packed it with something that smelled like sage and pine pitch. Apache medicine, or close enough. She dressed it again, clumsy but functional, and pulled on the spare shirt he'd left folded nearby. Too big, but clean. You know Apache remedies, she said. I know survival, he replied, still facing away. Learned from people who knew more than I did. Which people? Dead ones, mostly. She could have pushed, but she didn't. Instead, she walked to the door and looked out. The canyon was beautiful in the morning light, red stone walls rising high on both sides, a thin creek running through the middle, juniper and sage clinging to the rocks. It was hidden, defensible, the kind of place you'd pick if you never wanted to be found. How long have you been here? She asked. 3 years. Alone? Yes. Why? He finally turned to look at her. His expression was still flat, guarded, but there was something in his eyes now, something raw that he couldn't quite hide. Because I don't deserve company, he said. The words sat between them, heavy and true. Ayla knew that feeling, knew what it was like to carry weight that didn't have a name, to wake up every day convinced the world would be better if you just disappeared into it. She'd felt it after her brother died, after her mother, after every time she'd trusted someone and watched them prove her wrong. I'm leaving today, she said. All right. I mean it. I believe you. She waited for him to argue, to tell her it was too soon, that she'd tear the wound open again. But he didn't. He just nodded and went back to staring at the canyon. She hated that she was disappointed. By midday, she was dressed and packed. Rowan had given her a canteen refilled from the creek and a small pouch of dried food. She'd tried to refuse, but he'd just set it on the table and walked away, so she'd taken it. Pride was one thing, stupidity was another. She stood at the canyon mouth, the desert stretching out before her in waves of heat and dust. Her side ached, but it was bearable. She could make it to the trading post at Red Creek if she moved slow, rested when she needed to. From there, maybe north, maybe west. Somewhere no one knew her face. Ayla. She turned. Rowan was standing in the doorway of the cabin, one hand braced against the frame. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how to start. "What?" she asked. "If you need to come back." He stopped, shook his head. "Forget it. Say it." He met her eyes. "If you need to come back, the door's open. No questions." She didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know if it was a kindness or a trap or just the words of a lonely man who'd forgotten how to talk to people. So she just nodded once and turned away. "Rowan," she said, not looking back. "Yeah? Why'd you really save me?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quiet, almost too quiet to hear. "Because I couldn't save anyone else." She didn't turn around, didn't say anything, just started walking. But she didn't forget the way his voice cracked when he said it. She made it 6 miles before the fever hit. It started as a chill, creeping up her spine even though the sun was baking the rocks hot enough to sear skin. Then came the shaking, her whole body trembling so hard she had to stop and lean against a boulder just to stay upright. She pressed a hand to her forehead, and it came away slick with sweat. Infection. The word dropped into her mind like a stone into still water, sending ripples of panic through her chest. She'd seen infection before, seen what it did to men, to women, to children. Seen the way it turned skin black and filled bodies with poison until there was nothing left but fever dreams and silence. She fumbled for the canteen, drank deep, and kept moving. One foot in front of the other. The desert blurred around her, shapes losing definition, the ground tilting like the deck of a ship. By the time the sun started to set, she knew she wasn't going to make it. She collapsed under an overhang out of the direct light and closed her eyes. Her side was on fire now, the pain radiating out in waves that made her stomach turn. She could feel the heat coming off her own skin, could taste copper at the back of her throat. This is how it ends, she thought distantly. Not fighting, not running, just burning up alone in the desert like every other piece of forgotten trash. She almost laughed. Then she heard footsteps. Slow. Steady. The scrape of boots on stone. She forced her eyes open and saw him. Rowan, silhouetted against the dying light, holding the rifle in one hand and a pack in the other. He looked down at her and something in his face cracked, just for a second, just long enough for her to see the fear underneath. "You followed me," she rasped. "Yeah." "Why?" He knelt beside her, set down the rifle, and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. His expression went tight. "Because I knew you wouldn't make it," he said. "I told you to let me go." "I know." He slid an arm under her shoulders, lifting her like she weighed nothing. "I'm bad at listening." She wanted to fight him, wanted to spit and claw and prove she didn't need saving. But the world was spinning and she couldn't feel her legs anymore, and the only solid thing in the universe was the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "I'm going to die," she whispered. "No," he said, and his voice was hard, absolute. "You're not." He started walking, carrying her back toward the canyon, and she closed her eyes and let him. Because here's the thing about survival. Sometimes you can't do it alone. Sometimes you have to let someone else be strong when you've got nothing left. Even if that someone is the last person you thought you'd ever trust. Especially then. The fever didn't break for 3 days. Rowan knew the signs, had seen them before, in field hospitals and makeshift camps where men died screaming or went quiet in ways that were worse. He'd learned to read infection the way some men read the sky, looking for the telltale darkness that meant a storm was coming whether you were ready or not. Ayla's wound had gone bad, not catastrophically, not yet, but the edges were inflamed and hot to the touch, and the fever that rolled off her skin made the air around her shimmer. She thrashed in the bedroll, muttering words he couldn't understand. Apache, he thought, or maybe just the language fever spoke when it got deep enough into someone's blood. He changed the bandages every few hours, packed the wound with fresh sage and yarrow, forced water between her cracked lips whenever she'd take it. Most of the time she fought him, weak and disoriented, her hands pushing at his chest or clawing at his arms. Once she'd screamed something that sounded like a name and tried to run, stumbling 3 feet before her legs gave out. He'd caught her before she hit the floor, and she'd looked at him with eyes that didn't recognize anything, pupils blown so wide they swallowed the brown. "It's all right," he'd said, even though it wasn't. "You're safe." She'd spat in his face. He'd wiped it off and carried her back to the bedroll. Now it was the 3rd night, and he sat by the fire cleaning his rifle for the 4th time because his hands needed something to do. The cabin was too quiet except for her ragged breathing, the occasional whimper when the pain got through whatever dark place her mind had retreated to. He'd barely slept, just dozed in the chair, jerking awake every time her breathing changed, every time the wind rattled the shutters. He was exhausted, hollowed out, and he couldn't stop thinking about the men who'd shot her, wondering if they were still out there, wondering if they'd come looking. Let them, part of him thought. The cold part, the part that had survived the war by becoming something that didn't feel much of anything anymore. But there was another part now, smaller and more fragile, that kept glancing at the woman dying in his bedroll and thinking, not her, not this one. He didn't know when that had happened, didn't particularly want to examine it. Around midnight, her breathing changed, slowed, deepened. He set down the rifle and moved to her side, pressing 2 fingers to the pulse point in her neck. Still strong, still fighting. He touched her forehead and felt the fever starting to ebb, just a little, just enough to notice. "Come on," he muttered. "Don't quit now." Her eyes opened. For a second she just stared at the ceiling, unfocused, her chest rising and falling in slow pulls. Then her gaze slid sideways and found him. This time there was recognition there. Awareness. "You're still here," she rasped. "Yeah. Thought you'd leave me to rot." "Thought about it," he said. "Decided against it." She almost smiled. It was a weak thing, barely there, but it counted. Then her face twisted and she pressed a hand to her side, hissing through her teeth. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough. But you're still breathing." "That your metric for success?" "It's the only one that matters." She closed her eyes again, but this time it looked like rest, not fever. He stood and moved back to the fire, giving her space, giving himself space. His hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets and stared at the flames until they stopped. Behind him, Ayla's voice drifted through the dark, quiet, and rough. "Thank you." He didn't turn around, didn't trust himself to. "Don't," he said. "Why not?" "Because I don't deserve it." Silence. Then, "Maybe I'll thank you anyway." He didn't have an answer for that, so he just stood there, listening to her breathe, and tried not to think about all the people he hadn't been able to save. Beat. By the 4th day, she was sitting up on her own, propped against the wall with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The fever had broken completely, leaving her pale and weak but clear-eyed. Rowan had made something that passed for stew, dried venison, wild onions, cornmeal turned to mush, and she ate it slowly, grimacing at the taste but not complaining. "You're a terrible cook," she said. "I know. I've had better food scraped off rocks." "I believe you." She set down the bowl and looked at him. Really looked. The kind of stare that felt like it was cataloging every scar, every hesitation, every crack in the armor. "You were cavalry," she said, "but you didn't just scout. You fought." It wasn't a question. He kept his face neutral. "Everyone fought," he said. "Not like you." She nodded toward his hands, the scars across the knuckles, the way 2 of his fingers on the left hand didn't quite straighten all the way. "Those aren't from riding. You got close, personal." "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." He laughed, short and bitter. "You don't want that." "Try me." Rowan stood and walked to the window, staring out at the canyon. The sun was setting again, painting the rocks red and gold, beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. He'd spent 3 years in this place trying to forget, and here was this woman dragging it all back to the surface with questions he didn't know how to answer. "I was a scout," he said finally. 3rd Cavalry, Arizona Territory. My job was to find Apache camps, report back, let the officers decide what to do next. He paused, jaw tight. Sometimes they decided to do nothing. Sometimes they decided to burn everything to the ground. And you let them. I followed orders. That's not an answer. He turned to face her. What do you want from me, Ayla? You want me to say I'm sorry? That I regret it? I do, every single day. But it doesn't change what happened. Doesn't bring anyone back. Her expression was unreadable. How many? I don't know. Guess. I don't. He stopped, forced himself to meet her eyes. Enough that I stopped counting. The words hung between them, ugly and true. He waited for her to tell him to get out, to leave her alone, to go back to whatever hell he'd crawled out of. Instead, she just nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she already knew. My brother died at Canyon de Muerto, she said, 4 years ago. He was 16. Cavalry came through, said they were looking for raiders, burned half the camp, shot anyone who ran. He ran. She looked down at her hands, turning them over like she was seeing them for the first time. He was carrying water, just water. Rowan felt something cold settle in his stomach. I wasn't there. I know. I would have killed you already if you were. Then why are you telling me this? Because you asked for the truth. She pulled the blanket tighter. And because I need to know if you're the kind of man who'd do it again. No. How do I know that? You don't, he said quietly. You just have to decide if you believe me or not. She studied him for a long moment, her face shadowed and hard. Then she leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. I haven't decided yet, she said. He nodded. Fair enough. They didn't speak again that night. Rowan went outside and chopped firewood until his shoulders burned, until the repetitive crack of the axe drowned out everything else. When he came back in, Ayla was asleep, her breathing even and steady. He sat by the fire and didn't let himself think about how much easier it would be if she hated him. The days started to blur together after that. Ayla grew stronger slowly, stubbornly, the kind of recovery that came in inches instead of miles. She'd sit outside in the morning sun, letting it warm her skin, then spend the afternoon testing her body's limits, walking the length of the cabin, bending and stretching, wincing when the wound pulled, but never stopping. Rowan watched from a distance, ready to help if she fell, but she never asked and he never offered. They developed a rhythm. He'd hunt or fish in the mornings, bringing back rabbits or trout from the creek. She'd try to cook them with varying degrees of success. Once she'd burned the fish so badly the cabin filled with smoke, and they'd both ended up coughing on the porch, laughing despite themselves. It had felt strange, that laughter, like a language neither of them had spoken in years. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire and talk. Not about the war, not about the past, just small things. She told him about growing up between two worlds, how her mother had been Mexican and her father Apache, how she'd never quite fit in either place. He told her about Missouri, about a farm that didn't exist anymore, about a sister he hadn't seen since before the war. You think she's still alive? Ayla asked. I don't know, haven't checked. Why not? He poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers spiral up into the dark. Because if she is, she's better off not knowing what I became. Or maybe she's been looking for you, Ayla said. Maybe she thinks you're dead and she's spent every day since wondering if she could have done something different. The words hit harder than she probably meant them to. He stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. I'm going to check the perimeter, he said. Rowan, get some sleep. He left before she could finish, stepping out into the cold desert night. The stars overhead were so thick they looked like spilled salt, beautiful and indifferent. He walked the canyon edge, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip, listening to the silence. He'd left his sister behind because he'd been too much of a coward to face her. Because he couldn't stand the thought of her seeing what the war had made him. Because some part of him believed he deserved to be alone. But here's the thing about running from yourself. You never get far enough. He stood there until the cold bit through his jacket, until his breath came out in clouds, and then he went back inside. Ayla was still awake, sitting by the fire with the blanket around her shoulders. I shouldn't have said that, she said quietly. You weren't wrong. Still, it wasn't fair. He sat down across from her, the fire crackling between them. You want to know something funny? I spent 3 years out here telling myself I was protecting people by staying away, that I was doing the noble thing. He shook his head. But really I was just scared. Easier to hide than to face what I'd done. Easier to pretend the world forgot about me. Did it work? No. Good, she said. Running doesn't fix anything, just makes the distance longer when you finally have to turn around. They sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just two people who'd both run as far as they could and ended up in the same strange place, trying to figure out what came next. Eventually, Ayla stood, testing her weight, and moved toward the bedroll. I'm leaving soon, she said. I know. Not because I want to. He looked up at her, surprised. She was silhouetted against the firelight, her face half in shadow, and there was something raw in her expression, something that looked like the truth cost her to say. Then why? He asked. Because staying here feels like giving up, she said, like admitting I don't have anywhere else to go. And I'm not ready to do that yet. He understood, more than she probably knew. When you're ready to leave, he said, I won't stop you. I know. She hesitated then, but the infection's not gone. Not all the way. I can feel it, like something still burning under the skin. Rowan stood and moved closer, frowning. Let me see. She lifted her shirt enough to show the bandage. He unwrapped it carefully, and even in the dim light he could see the wound wasn't healing right. The edges were still too red, still weeping slightly, and when he pressed gently around it, she flinched. Damn, he muttered. How bad? It's not getting worse, but it's not getting better either. We need something stronger than sage, something that'll kill the infection at the root. Like what? He stepped back, thinking. There's a plant, grows in the mountains about 2 days north. Apache healers used to use it for wounds that wouldn't close. Burns like hell, but it works. He met her eyes. Your people would know it. Probably have a name for it, I don't. Ayla's expression shifted. You're talking about ghost leaf. If that's what you call it, yeah. It only grows in sacred territory. Places my father's people guard. If I go there, they'll know. And if they see me, she stopped, jaw tight. They don't think much of women who leave. Then we won't let them see you. We? The word was out before he could think better of it. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling exposed. You can't make that ride alone, he said. Not in your condition. And if we run into trouble, you're going to need someone watching your back. Someone like you. Someone like me. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she started to laugh. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp, edged with disbelief. You want to ride into Apache territory with me, she said. You, an ex-cavalry scout. I know how it sounds. Do you? Because it sounds insane, suicidal even. Probably, he admitted. But you need that plant, and I know the land. I can get us there and back without being seen. Why would you do that? The question was quiet, serious, and he didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, and just didn't want to say it out loud. That somewhere in the last few days, watching her fight to stay alive, he'd started to care whether she lived or died. That the thought of her riding off into hostile territory alone and bleeding made something in his chest twist tight. Because I'm tired of letting people die when I could have done something, he said finally. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the trap. When she didn't find one, her expression softened just a fraction. If we do this, she said, and my father's warriors find us, they won't ask questions. They'll just kill you, slowly, probably, and I won't be able to stop them. I know. And you're still willing? Yeah. Why? He looked at her, really looked at the fierce set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, the way she held herself like she was always ready to fight, even when she could barely stand. She reminded him of something he'd forgotten, something about strength that didn't come from walls or distance, but from refusing to quit, even when quitting made sense. Because you're not done yet, he said, and I'll be damned if I let some infection finish what those bastards started. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decided. All right, she said, we leave at first light. Yes, they didn't. Ayla woke before dawn, fever spiking again, her skin hot and dry. Rowan found her hunched over the water basin, retching, and when he touched her shoulder, she jerked away like his hand burned. I'm fine, she gasped. You're not. I said I'm fine, but she wasn't. The infection was spreading, or deepening, or both. He could see it in the gray cast to her skin, the tremor in her hands, the way she couldn't quite catch her breath. "We're not leaving today," he said. "We have to. Not like this. You'll die before we're 5 miles out." She tried to stand and her legs buckled. He caught her, lowering her back to the floor, and she looked up at him with eyes that were bright with fever and something that might have been fear. "I don't have time," she whispered. "You don't have a choice." He carried her back to the bedroll and spent the rest of the day fighting the fever with everything he had. Cold compresses, water forced down her throat, poultices that made the cabin reek of herbs and desperation. She drifted in and out, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost, calling out names he didn't recognize. At one point she grabbed his wrist, her grip weak but insistent. "If I die." "You're not going to die." "If I do," she continued, voice rough, "don't bury me here. Take me to the ridge, the one that faces east. Let the sun find me. Ayla, promise me." He looked into her eyes and saw she meant it, that she was already planning for the end, already accepting it in a way that made his throat tight. "I promise," he said. She nodded and let go, sinking back into the dark. He sat beside her through the night, watching her breathe, and made a different promise to himself, that she wasn't going to die. Not here, not now, not while he had anything to say about it. When morning came, pale and cold, the fever had broken again. Ayla opened her eyes and looked at him, exhausted but clear. "We need to go," she said. "You're not strong enough." "I will be." She struggled to sit up, wincing. "Just give me a few hours. Let me eat something, then we go." "Ayla, don't." Her voice was hard. "Don't try to protect me from this. I know what I'm risking, and I know I'm running out of time." She met his eyes. "Please." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, too soon, too much. But he saw the steel in her gaze and knew she'd go with or without him if she had to. "All right," he said, "but we do this my way. Slow, careful, and if you start fading, we turn back. No arguments." "No arguments," she agreed. He didn't believe her, but he nodded anyway and went to prepare the horses. They left just after noon, riding slow through the canyon. Rowan had saddled his gelding, a tough, mean-tempered roan named Ash, who'd carried him through worse than this, and put Ayla on a gentler mare he'd traded for 2 years back. She sat the horse well despite the pain, her spine straight, her hands steady on the reins. They didn't talk much. The desert was too big for small words, and both of them were focused on just moving forward, 1 mile at a time. The sun beat down hard, and Rowan watched Ayla from the corner of his eye, looking for signs of the fever returning, the glassy eyes, the tremor, the way she'd start to sway. Twice he made her stop and drink. Once he made her rest in the shade while he checked the wound. It looked the same, angry, stubborn, refusing to heal. "How much further?" she asked. "Day and a half if we keep this pace. Maybe less if we push through the night. Let's push. You need rest." "I'll rest when we get there." He started to argue, then saw the set of her jaw and knew it was pointless. So he just nodded, and they kept riding. The landscape shifted as they moved north, red stone giving way to pine-covered slopes, the air growing cooler, thinner. By the time the sun started to set, they were climbing into foothills, the trail narrow and rocky. Rowan led the way, his rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the ridges for movement. Apache territory. He could feel it in the air, in the way the land seemed to hold its breath. This was a place that didn't want him, a place where his presence was a violation. Every instinct he had screamed at him to turn back, to get out before someone saw them. But Ayla needed that plant. So he kept going. They made camp in a sheltered draw just as full dark hit. No fire, too risky. They ate dried meat and stale bread in silence, huddled under a single blanket for warmth. Ayla's breathing was shallow, labored, and when she thought he wasn't looking, she pressed a hand to her side and grimaced. "Talk to me," Rowan said quietly. "About what?" "Anything. Keep yourself awake." She was quiet for a moment, then, "When I was a kid, my brother used to take me hunting. We'd go out before dawn, just the two of us, and he'd teach me to track deer, how to read the signs, the broken branches, the marks in the dirt." Her voice went soft. He was patient. Never got mad when I messed up. Just showed me again. Sounds like a good man. He was. She looked up at the stars. After he died, I tried to keep doing it. Hunting, I mean. Thought it would make me feel close to him. But it just made it worse. Every time I was out there, I'd remember how he'd laugh at something stupid I said, or the way he'd ruffle my hair when I got it right. She paused. Eventually I stopped. Couldn't take it. I get that, Rowan said. Yeah, she glanced at him. I think you do. They sat in silence after that, shoulder to shoulder in the dark. Two people carrying ghosts they couldn't set down. Eventually, Ayla's head drooped against his shoulder and her breathing evened out. He didn't move. Just sat there, keeping watch, listening to the night. Around midnight, he heard something, the distant sound of horses, voices carried on the wind. He tensed, hand moving to the rifle, but the sounds faded and didn't come back. They were close, though, too close. He didn't sleep that night. When dawn broke gray and cold, he woke Ayla gently, and they rode on. They reached the sacred valley just before midday. It was a narrow canyon, steep-sided and green, with a creek running through the center and trees so thick the sunlight barely touched the ground. Rowan could see why the Apache guarded it. This was a place that felt alive in a way the desert didn't, like the earth was holding something precious close to its chest. And there, growing in clusters along the creek bank, was the ghost leaf. The plant was unremarkable, pale green, low to the ground, leaves shaped like narrow blades. But Rowan had seen healers use it before, had watched it pull infection out of wounds that should have killed men. If anything could save Ayla, this was it. There, she breathed, pointing. They dismounted and approached carefully, Rowan keeping his eyes on the ridges above. The valley was quiet, too quiet, and every nerve in his body was screaming that they were being watched. Ayla knelt by the creek and started gathering the plant, her hands moving quickly despite the pain. Rowan stood guard, rifle ready, his heart hammering against his ribs. They almost made it. The arrow hit the ground 3 inches from his boot. Rowan spun, raising the rifle, and saw them, 5 warriors on the ridge above, already knocking fresh arrows. His stomach dropped. They were surrounded, outgunned, and miles from anywhere safe. Ayla, he said quietly, we need to go, now. But she was frozen, staring up at the warriors, her face gone pale. One of them stepped forward, and even from this distance, Rowan could see the rage in his posture, the way his bow arm trembled with the effort of not firing. That's my cousin, Ayla whispered. Dakota. The one who wants me dead. Yeah. The warrior shouted something in Apache, harsh and commanding. Ayla responded in the same language, her voice sharp, defiant. The exchange went back and forth, the tension ratcheting higher with every word, and Rowan didn't need to understand the language to know this was about to go very, very bad. Then Dakota's gaze shifted to Rowan. The warrior's expression twisted with recognition and hate, and he said something that made the others tense. What did he say? Rowan asked. He said you're the white dog who killed his brother. Ayla's voice was shaking. He says he's going to skin you alive and hang your body from the trees. Did I? I don't know. Did you kill anyone at the massacre at Shadow Ridge? Rowan's blood went cold. He'd been at Shadow Ridge. He'd followed orders, lit fires, pulled the trigger when he was told. He didn't know names, didn't know faces, just enemies who needed to die. Yeah, he said quietly. I was there. Ayla closed her eyes. Then we're both dead. But Rowan wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not like this. He lowered the rifle slowly, deliberately, and raised his hands. Tell him, he said, that I came here to save you, that I'm not his enemy anymore. He won't care. Tell him anyway. Ayla hesitated, then spoke again. Dakota spat on the ground and drew his bowstring taut, the arrow aimed directly at Rowan's chest. And then a voice rang out from deeper in the canyon, sharp and commanding, and everyone froze. A man stepped into view, older, broad-shouldered, his face lined with age and authority. He wore traditional clothing, feathers woven into his long gray hair, and he carried himself like someone who didn't need weapons to be dangerous. Ayla made a sound like she'd been punched. My father, she whispered. The chief walked forward slowly, his eyes moving from Ayla to Rowan and back again. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, and Rowan felt the weight of every word, even though he didn't understand them. Ayla responded, her voice breaking, and suddenly they were arguing, not yelling, but the kind of argument that cut deeper than screaming ever could. Rowan stood there, hands still raised, knowing his life was balanced on the edge of whatever was being said. Finally, the chief turned to look at him. Their eyes met, and Rowan saw the hate there, the rage, the desire to see him suffer. But beneath it, just barely, there was something else, something tired. The chief said one word. Ayla translated, her voice barely audible. He says you have until sunset to leave this valley. After that, if you're still here, he'll let Dakota do whatever he wants with you. And you? She swallowed hard. He says I stay, that I've shamed the family long enough. Go, she said, not looking at him. Take the plant and go. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. Like hell I don't. He stepped forward, and the warriors tensed, arrows tracking his movement. The chief barked something, and they lowered them slightly, but the threat remained. Rowan looked at Ayla's father and spoke slowly, clearly, hoping the tone would carry what the words couldn't. Your daughter is dying, he said. That wound in her side, it's infected. She needs this medicine or she's gone in a week, maybe less. I didn't bring her here to trap her. I brought her here to save her life. Ayla translated haltingly. The chief's expression didn't change. He doesn't care, she said. Then tell him I'll leave. I'll ride out right now and never come back. But let me treat her first. Give me 1 day. After that, she's yours. She can stay, she can go, I don't care. Just let me make sure she doesn't die. Ayla spoke again, her voice shaking. The chief was silent for a long time, his gaze moving between them, weighing something Rowan couldn't see. Finally, he spoke. He says no, Ayla translated. He says if you care so much, you'll trust her people to heal her. And if you don't trust us, then you're the enemy he always knew you were. It was a test. Rowan could see it in the old man's eyes, the challenge, the dare. He was being asked to choose between keeping Ayla safe himself or trusting the people who had every reason to hate him. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to grab Ayla and run, to shoot his way out if he had to do whatever it took to keep her alive. But he looked at her face, saw the exhaustion there, the pain, the conflict tearing her apart, and he knew what he had to do. He lowered his hand slowly and took a step back. All right, he said, she stays. You heal her, but if she dies... He met the chief's eyes. I'm coming back, and I won't be alone. It was a bluff, a terrible, transparent bluff. But he said it anyway because he needed them to know he wasn't abandoning her, that this wasn't surrender. The chief nodded once, a fraction of an inch, and gestured to the warriors. They moved down into the valley, surrounding Ayla, pulling her gently but firmly away from Rowan. She looked back at him, her eyes wide and scared. Rowan, you're going to be fine, he said, and tried to believe it. I'll see you soon. You can't promise that. I know. One of the warriors handed him the bundle of ghost leaf she'd gathered. He took it, though it felt like ash in his hands now, useless without her to use it on. Then they led her away, deeper into the canyon, and he was alone. Rowan stood there for a long time, staring at the place where she'd disappeared, his chest tight and his hands shaking. Then he mounted Ash and rode out, heading back toward the canyon that suddenly felt a lot emptier than it had before. He didn't look back. Couldn't. Because if he did, he might do something stupid, something that would get them both killed. The ride back felt twice as long. Rowan pushed Ash hard the first few hours, putting distance between himself and the sacred valley. But his mind stayed behind with Ayla. He kept seeing her face as they'd pulled her away, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd reached for him without meaning to. He should have fought harder. Should have done something other than just stand there and let them take her. But what? Start a war he couldn't win? Get them both killed trying to prove a point? He'd made the only choice that gave her a chance. He knew that. Didn't make it easier. By the time he made camp that night, his hands were blistered from gripping the reins too tight, and his jaw ached from clenching it. He built a small fire, more for the light than the warmth, and sat staring into the flames while his coffee went cold in the cup. The bundle of ghost leaf sat beside him, wrapped in cloth. Useless now. He'd risked everything to get it and hadn't even been able to use it. The thought made him want to throw the damn thing into the fire, watch it burn, pretend none of this had happened. Instead, he picked it up and carefully tucked it into his saddlebag, just in case. The desert night pressed in around him, vast and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Ayla was either being healed or dying, and he had no way of knowing which. The not knowing was worse than the fear. At least with fear, you could do something. Run, fight, make a plan. With this, all he could do was wait. He hated waiting. Around midnight, he heard coyotes yipping in the distance, their calls echoing off the canyon walls. The sound reminded him of the wolves that had been stalking Ayla the night he'd found her, and before he could stop himself, he was thinking about what would have happened if he hadn't been there. If he'd stayed in his cabin, kept to himself, let the world turn without him. She'd be dead. No question. But maybe that would have been simpler. Maybe she'd have preferred dying in the desert to being dragged back to a father who looked at her like she was a problem that needed solving. Maybe Rowan had just delayed the inevitable, made everything worse by getting involved. "Stop it," he muttered aloud. His voice sounded strange in the empty dark. Foreign. Like it belonged to someone else. He forced himself to lie down, to close his eyes, to try for sleep even though he knew it wouldn't come. His mind kept circling back to the valley, to the chief's face, to Dakota's bowstring pulled taut and aimed at his heart. He'd killed that man's brother at Shadow Ridge. Probably. He honestly couldn't remember. There'd been so much smoke, so much chaos, bodies dropping and people screaming and orders being shouted over the gunfire. He'd shot whoever his commanding officer pointed at and tried not to think about whether they were armed or running or just trying to protect their families. That was the thing about war. It turned killing into a reflex. Point, shoot, move on. No time for doubt, no room for mercy. He'd been good at it. That was the worst part. He'd been efficient, cold, exactly the kind of soldier the cavalry wanted. And when it was over, when the camps were burning and the survivors were being marched away in chains, he'd felt nothing. It wasn't until months later, lying awake in a barracks somewhere, that the faces had started coming back. Women clutching children, old men with their hands raised, a boy no older than 16 with a water jug, running, just running. Rowan sat up fast, his heart pounding. He couldn't do this. Couldn't sit here in the dark, letting the ghosts crowd in. He needed to move, to act, to do something other than replay the past on an endless loop. So he stood, kicked dirt over the fire, and saddled Ash in the pre-dawn gray. If he rode hard, he could be back at the cabin by tomorrow night. And then what? He didn't have an answer for that, so he just started riding. Mishad. The cabin looked exactly the same as when he'd left it, which somehow made it feel more empty. Rowan unsaddled Ash, rubbed him down, made sure he had water and feed. Then he stood in the doorway of the cabin and couldn't quite make himself go inside. Everything in there reminded him of Ayla, the bedroll where she'd fought the fever, the table where they'd sat and talked until the fire burned low, the shelves where he'd grabbed supplies to treat her wound, her life hanging in the balance while he tried to remember field medicine he'd half forgotten. He went inside anyway, because standing in the doorway like an idiot wasn't going to change anything. The ghost leaf went on the shelf with the other medicinal herbs. He cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, inventoried his supplies out of habit more than necessity. The work kept his hands busy but did nothing for his mind. By the third day, he was pacing. By the fifth, he'd convinced himself she was dead. The infection had spread, the healers hadn't been able to stop it, and she'd died calling his name while her father stood by and watched. Or maybe Dakota had killed her himself, claimed it was an accident, and the chief had let it slide because blood was thicker than whatever fragile trust Ayla had built with an outsider. Rowan knew he was spiraling, knew he was catastrophizing, didn't stop the thoughts from coming. On the sixth day, he saddled Ash and started riding north. He made it about 3 miles before he stopped himself. Riding back to the valley wouldn't help, would probably just get him killed and wouldn't save Ayla even if she was still alive. The smart move was to wait, give it time, trust that her people knew what they were doing. He turned around and rode back to the cabin. That night he dreamed about Shadow Ridge, about smoke and screaming and a boy with a water jug who looked at him with Ayla's eyes before the bullet hit. He woke up gasping, soaked in sweat, and couldn't get back to sleep. The 7th day dawned clear and cold. Rowan was outside chopping firewood, again because he'd already chopped enough to last through winter, but needed something to hit, when he heard hoofbeats. His hand went to the pistol at his hip before his brain caught up. He turned, ready for a fight, and saw riders coming down the canyon trail. 3 of them. Apache warriors on horseback, moving slow and deliberate. Not charging, not attacking, just coming. Rowan set down the axe and waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. They were too far away to make out faces, but he could see their posture, the way they sat their horses. This wasn't a war party. If they'd come to kill him, they'd have done it already. So what did they want? The riders stopped about 20 yards out. 2 of them stayed mounted. The third dismounted and walked forward, and as he got closer, Rowan recognized him, one of the warriors who'd been in the valley, younger than the others, maybe 19 or 20. The warrior stopped a few feet away and studied Rowan with an expression that was hard to read. Not hostile exactly, more like curious, wary. "You are Rowan," he said in heavily accented English. "Yeah." "The white man who saved Ayla Nakoa." "I didn't save her. I just kept her from dying until you could." The corner of the warrior's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You argue like her. She also does not accept what is true." Rowan's chest tightened. "She's alive?" "Yes." The relief hit him so hard he had to lock his knees to keep from swaying. "The infection?" "Gone." "The ghost leaf worked. She is weak but healing." The warrior paused. "She asks for you." "What?" "She asks if you live, if you return to your canyon. My uncle, the chief—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "He does not wish her to see you. He says you are a reminder of pain, that she will heal better if she forgets the white man who brought her home." "And what does she say?" The warrior's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "She says her uncle can go to hell." Despite everything, Rowan almost laughed. "Yeah, that sounded like Ayla." "So why are you here?" he asked. "Because my cousin Dakota is not a patient man. He wants Ayla as his wife. Has wanted her since before she left. The chief says she must marry within the tribe to restore honor." The warrior met Rowan's eyes. "She refuses. Says she will die first. Dakota says if she will not have him, he will take her by force." Ice slid down Rowan's spine. "When?" "Tonight. Maybe tomorrow. He gathers his friends, makes plans. My uncle knows but does nothing. Says it is tribal business, that Ayla must accept her place." "And you're telling me this because I am her cousin too. And I remember when she was a child, before the world made her hard. She was kind. She laughed." His jaw tightened. "Dakota will break her, and the chief will let it happen because he is more afraid of losing face than losing his daughter." Rowan stared at the young warrior, trying to read the angle, the trap. But all he saw was genuine concern. Anger. The kind of moral clarity you either had or didn't. "What's your name?" Rowan asked. "Kai." "All right, Kai. What do you want me to do?" "Come. Tonight. Take her before Dakota can." Kai glanced back at the other 2 riders, then lowered his voice. "I will make sure the north path is unguarded. You will have one chance. If you fail, we both die." "Why are you risking this?" "Because she is family. And family does not let family be destroyed." He looked at Rowan steadily. "Even if it means helping a white man. Even if it shames me." There was weight in those words. Cost. Kai was gambling everything, his honor, his standing, maybe his life, on the belief that Rowan wouldn't betray him, that this ex-cavalry scout who'd killed his people could be trusted with something precious. Rowan should have said no. Should have told Kai to go back, find another way, keep Ayla safe without dragging him into tribal politics that would get them all killed. Instead, he said, "What time?" "Midnight. The camp will be drunk from celebration. Dakota drinks heaviest. He will not notice she is gone until morning. Maybe later." "Where is she?" "In my uncle's lodge, center of camp. I will leave the back entrance unwatched. But you must be silent. If the dogs bark, if anyone sees—" "I know." Kai studied him for a long moment. Then he reached into his belt and pulled out a knife. Apache made, the handle wrapped in leather, the blade sharp enough to split hair. "If you are caught," he said, handing it to Rowan, "do not let them take you alive. It will be worse than you can imagine." Rowan took the knife and felt the weight of it. Understood. And Rowan? Kai's expression went hard. If you hurt her, if you betray this trust, I will find you. I will make what Dakota wants to do look like mercy. I won't. Good. Kai stepped back, then hesitated. She talks about you. In her sleep. Calls your name when the fever dreams come. He looked away, uncomfortable. I do not understand what you are to her, but she trusts you. Try to deserve it. He mounted his horse, and the three of them rode off without another word, disappearing back up the canyon trail. Rowan stood there holding the knife, his mind racing. This was insane. Suicidal. He'd be riding into the heart of an Apache camp to steal away the chief's daughter while a rival waited to claim her. Even if Kai kept his word, even if the path was clear, 1,000 things could go wrong. He could be seen, caught, killed. Ayla could refuse to come. The dogs could bark. Any sane man would stay home. But Rowan hadn't been sane since the day he'd pulled that trigger at Shadow Ridge and watched innocents die. He went inside, loaded his saddlebags with ammunition and supplies, checked every weapon he owned. Then he sat down to wait for nightfall. The ride to the Apache camp took 4 hours in the dark. Rowan moved carefully, using game trails and dry creek beds to avoid leaving tracks, stopping every few minutes to listen. The moon was a sliver, barely enough light to see by, but that worked in his favor. Darkness was a friend when you were doing something this stupid. He left Ash tied in a ravine about a mile from the camp and continued on foot, moving slow and low. As he got closer, he could see the glow of fires through the trees, hear the distant sound of drums and voices raised in song. Celebration, like Kai had said. Something about a successful hunt, maybe, or a ritual he didn't understand. He circled the camp wide, approaching from the north like Kai had instructed. The lodges were arranged in a loose circle, maybe 20 or 30 in total, with the chiefs in the center, larger than the others, decorated with painted symbols he couldn't read in the dark. Rowan crouched behind a juniper and studied the camp. Guards were posted at the main entrances, but they were relaxed, laughing, passing something between them that was probably liquor. Most of the tribe was gathered around the central fire, dancing or watching. He couldn't see Ayla anywhere. He waited until the guards' backs were turned, then moved. The approach felt like it took hours, even though it was probably less than 5 minutes. Every step sounded too loud, every breath too harsh. His heart was slamming so hard he was sure someone would hear it, but nobody turned, nobody shouted. He reached the back of the chief's lodge and pressed his ear to the hide wall. Voices inside, low and indistinct. He couldn't tell if one was Ayla. The entrance Kai had mentioned was a flap at the rear, tied shut but not secured. Rowan's hands shook as he worked the knots loose. This was it. Point of no return. Once he went inside, there was no walking this back. He ducked through the opening. The interior was dim, lit by a single small fire in the center. An older woman sat near it, working on some kind of beadwork, her back to him. On the far side of the lodge, lying on a pile of blankets, was Ayla. She was asleep, or pretending to be. Her face was thinner than he remembered, shadows under her eyes, but the fevered flush was gone. She looked alive, whole. Rowan moved toward her, silent, and her eyes snapped open. For a second they just stared at each other. Then her expression shifted from shock to understanding to something that looked almost like relief. She sat up carefully, and the old woman by the fire turned, saw Rowan, and opened her mouth to scream. Ayla moved faster. She grabbed the woman's arm, said something sharp and quick in Apache, and the woman's eyes went wide. There was a rapid exchange, the old woman shaking her head, Ayla's voice rising, desperate and pleading. Finally, the woman went quiet. She looked at Rowan with an expression that was equal parts disgust and resignation, then turned back to her beadwork like he didn't exist. Ayla stood, swaying slightly, and crossed to him. "You came," she whispered. "Yeah, you shouldn't have. I know. Dakota will kill you. He can try." She almost smiled. Then her face crumpled, and she grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Get me out of here," she said. "Please, before he—" A sound outside. Voices. Footsteps. Rowan's hand went to the pistol at his hip, and Ayla's eyes went wide. "The back," she hissed. They moved fast, ducking through the rear entrance just as someone came through the front. Rowan didn't look back. He grabbed Ayla's hand and ran. The camp was louder now, the celebration reaching a crescendo. Nobody noticed two shadows slipping between lodges, moving toward the tree line. They were almost clear when a dog started barking. Then another. Then someone shouted, "Run!" Rowan said. They ran. Behind them, the camp erupted into chaos. Voices yelling, more dogs barking, the sound of people scrambling. Rowan didn't look back. He just pulled Ayla through the trees, his free hand on the pistol, ready to shoot anything that moved. They hit the ravine at a dead sprint. Ash was right where Rowan had left him, ears pinned back, eyes rolling. Rowan lifted Ayla into the saddle and swung up behind her, kicking the horse into motion before his boots were in the stirrups. The gelding took off like the devil was chasing him, and maybe he was. Rowan could hear riders behind them now, closing fast, and he leaned low over Ash's neck and urged him faster. The desert at night was a nightmare. Rocks and cactus and holes that could break a horse's leg in an instant. But Rowan knew this land, had spent 3 years learning every trail and dry wash and hiding spot. He cut hard to the left, then right, weaving through terrain that would slow pursuers, putting distance between them and the camp. Ayla clung to the saddle horn, her breathing ragged. He could feel her trembling against him, whether from fear or exhaustion he couldn't tell. "You all right?" he asked. "No, but keep going." He did. They rode for 2 hours straight, only stopping when Ash started to stumble. Rowan dismounted and led the horse on foot, giving him a chance to recover, while Ayla stayed in the saddle and kept watch behind them. "Do you think they're still following?" she asked. "Yeah. Dakota won't give up easy. My father won't either." "I know." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Kai helped you." "How'd you know?" "Because nobody else would have, and because the old woman, my aunt, she said a young warrior with a good heart had shamed himself tonight, that he'd betrayed his chief for a half-breed and a white dog." Her voice cracked. She meant it as an insult, but I know she was talking about Kai. "He risked everything for you." "I know, and now he's—" She stopped, covered her face with her hands. "I've destroyed him, both of you. For what? So I can keep running? So I can pretend I'm free when I'm just homeless?" Rowan stopped walking and looked up at her. "You're not destroyed. You're alive, and sometimes that's all you get. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No, it's supposed to make you keep going." She stared at him, her eyes wet, and he saw the fight drain out of her. Not surrender, just exhaustion. The bone-deep kind that came from fighting too long with too little hope. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Back to the canyon. We hole up, wait for them to lose the trail, then figure out what's next. They won't stop looking." "I know." "So we just run forever?" "If we have to." "That's not a life, Rowan." "It's better than the alternative." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because he was right, and they both knew it. The alternative was her being dragged back to marry a man who saw her as property, or dying in the attempt to escape. At least running meant choice, meant agency, even if it didn't mean freedom. They started moving again. The desert stretched out around them, vast and cold, and somewhere behind them riders were coming with fire in their eyes and murder in their hearts. But for now, they were alive, and that would have to be enough. They reached the canyon just before dawn. Rowan led Ash down the narrow trail, every muscle in his body screaming for rest, and finally stopped at the cabin. Ayla slid out of the saddle and nearly collapsed. He caught her, held her upright until her legs remembered how to work. "Inside," he said. "I'll take care of the horse." She nodded and stumbled toward the door. By the time he'd unsaddled Ash and gotten him settled, she was sitting by the cold fireplace with her head in her hands. Rowan started a fire, put water on to boil, moved through the familiar motions of making the cabin livable again. Ayla didn't move, just sat there, staring at nothing. "You need to eat," he said. "I'm not hungry." "You need to eat anyway." "Why? So I can have energy to keep running?" She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and furious. "What's the point, Rowan? They're going to find us. And when they do, we'll deal with it." "How?" "You're one man. My father has an entire tribe. Dakota has—" She stopped, her jaw tight. "Do you know what he said to me? Before you came?" Rowan crouched in front of her, waiting. "He said I was his by right. That my father had promised me to him years ago and I'd disgraced both families by leaving. He said when we were married he'd teach me obedience, make me understand my place. Her voice shook. And my father just stood there and let him say it. Your father's a coward. He's a chief. He has to think about the tribe, about alliances. No, Rowan said flatly. He has to protect his daughter. That's not politics. That's basic decency. And he failed. Ayla stared at him, then, slowly, something in her expression shifted. Not quite hope, but maybe the absence of despair. What do we do? She asked quietly. We rest. We eat. Then we start planning. Planning what? There's nowhere to go that they won't find us. Then we make them regret looking. She almost laughed. You want to fight them? You and me against a war party? If it comes to that, yeah. That's insane. Probably. He met her eyes. But I didn't pull you out of that camp just to hand you back when they show up. So either we run until we find somewhere they can't follow, or we make a stand here and make it cost them enough that they decide you're not worth it. And if they decide I am worth it, then we fight until we can't anymore. She was quiet for a long time, studying his face like she was looking for the lie. When she didn't find one, she shook her head slowly. You're going to die for me, she said. That's what this is. You're planning to die. I'm planning to survive. Those aren't the same thing. Close enough. Rowan, Ayla. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength still there despite everything. I spent 3 years in this canyon trying to die without actually pulling the trigger. Figured if I stayed out here long enough, the desert would finish the job and I wouldn't have to feel guilty about it. Then you showed up bleeding and half dead, and for the first time in years, I had a reason to stay alive that wasn't just spite. I'm not a reason to live. Maybe not. But you're a reason to try. He squeezed her hand gently. So yeah, if it comes down to it, I'll fight for you. And if that means dying, at least I'll go out doing something that matters. Her eyes were wet again, but she didn't cry, just held his hand and nodded once. All right, she said, we make a stand. We make a stand. They sat there as the sun came up, two people who'd run as far as they could and decided to stop running and tried to figure out how to survive what came next. The first day they spent fortifying. Rowan had built the cabin with defense in mind. Narrow windows, thick walls, a clear line of sight to the canyon approaches. Now he reinforced it. He dragged deadfall timber to create barriers at the choke points, positioned rocks to slow riders, set up sight lines for rifle fire. Ayla helped where she could, moving slower than she wanted but refusing to rest. You're going to tear that wound open again, Rowan said as she struggled to lift a fallen log. Then I'll sew it shut myself. Ayla, shh, don't. She dropped the log and turned to face him, breathing hard. Don't treat me like I'm fragile. I'm not. I'm tired and I'm scared and I'm angry, but I'm not fragile. He raised his hands. All right, but if you pass out, I'm tying you to the bed. You can try. Despite everything, he smiled. They worked through the afternoon, stopping only when the sun got too brutal. Rowan taught her how to load and fire his spare rifle, watched as she sighted down the barrel and squeezed off practice shots at a target he'd set up downrange. She was a natural, steady hands, good eye, the kind of focus you couldn't teach. Where'd you learn to shoot? He asked. My brother, before he died. She lowered the rifle. He said if I was going to survive in a white man's world, I needed to know how to fight like they did. Smart man. Yeah, a lot of good it did him. That night they sat by the fire and went over the plan. Such as it was. If riders came, they'd engage at range, try to thin the numbers before they got close. If they made it to the cabin, Rowan and Ayla would fall back inside and turn it into a siege. The canyon had only 2 ways in, both narrow, both defensible. It wasn't much, but it was something. What if Kai comes with them? Ayla asked quietly. Rowan had been thinking about that. We don't shoot first. We give him a chance to talk, to walk away. But if he comes at us, I know. She stared into the flames. I don't want him to die because of me. He made his choice, same as we did. Doesn't make it easier. No, Rowan agreed. It doesn't. They fell silent after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the desert wind sang through the canyon, carrying with it the smell of sage and dust and the promise of violence to come. Rowan glanced at Ayla and saw her rubbing absently at the wound in her side, her expression distant. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Always. But it's getting better. The ghost leaf worked then." "Yeah." She looked at him. "Thank you. For getting it. For bringing me there even though you knew it was dangerous. You already thanked me." "I know, but I'm doing it again." She hesitated, then, "Why did you really come back for me tonight? Kai said my father told you to stay away. You could have listened, could have let them handle it." Rowan stared at the fire, trying to find the right words. There weren't any. Just the truth, messy and complicated and impossible to dress up. Because the thought of you trapped there, being forced into something you didn't want, made me feel the same way I felt at Shadow Ridge, he said quietly. Helpless. Like I was watching something terrible happen and doing nothing to stop it. And I swore when I left the cavalry that I'd never feel that way again. That if I saw someone suffering and I could do something about it, I would. He met her eyes. So I did. Ayla was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the space between them and took his hand. "You're a good man, Rowan Vance." "I'm really not." "Yes," she said firmly. "You are. You just don't know it yet." He wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons she was wrong, all the bodies he'd left behind, all the choices he couldn't take back. But the way she was looking at him, steady and sure and without a trace of doubt, made the words die in his throat. So he just squeezed her hand and let himself believe her, just for a moment. Just long enough to remember what hope felt like. They came on the third day. Rowan spotted them just after dawn, 6 riders on the far ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. They weren't trying to hide, weren't sneaking, just sitting there, letting themselves be seen. A message. "We know where you are?" Rowan grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Ayla appeared at his shoulder, her own weapon ready. "How many?" she asked. 6. Maybe more behind them. "Do you see Dakota?" He scanned the line. Even at this distance, he could make out the lead rider. Tall, broad-shouldered, sitting his horse like he owned the world. "Yeah," Rowan said, front and center." "And my father?" "Don't see him. Might be back at camp. Or he might be waiting to see if Dakota succeeds before he gets involved." Her voice was bitter. Plausible deniability. One of the riders detached from the group and started down the canyon trail. Alone. Unarmed, as far as Rowan could tell. "That's Kai," Ayla breathed. It was. Rowan recognized the way he sat his horse, the set of his shoulders. The young warrior rode slowly, hands visible, making it clear he wasn't here to fight. Rowan and Ayla stepped outside as he approached. Kai stopped about 30 feet away and dismounted, his expression grave. "Ayla," he said. "Kai." Her voice cracked. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to. Dakota says you have until sunset to return. After that, he comes down and takes you by force, and he won't be gentle." "Let him try," Rowan said. Kai looked at him, and for the first time Rowan saw genuine fear in the young warrior's eyes. "You do not understand what you face. Dakota is the best fighter in our tribe. He has killed more men than you have years, and he is angry, angrier than I have ever seen him. If you fight him, you will die." "Maybe." "Not maybe. Certain." Kai turned back to Ayla. "Cousin, please, come with me now. I will speak to the chief, convince him to refuse Dakota's claim. There are other warriors, better men. We can find another way." "There is no other way," Ayla said quietly. "My father has already decided. And even if he hadn't, I'm done being treated like livestock. I'm done pretending I have a place there." "Then where will you go? The white man's world will not accept you. Our world will hunt you. Where's left?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'd rather die free than live as someone's property." Kai closed his eyes, pain etched across his face. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I tried," he said. "I tried to protect you. But I am only one man, and Dakota has the chief's ear. I am sorry, cousin, for failing you. You didn't fail me. You gave me a chance. That's more than anyone else did." He nodded once, then looked at Rowan. "White man, when the fighting starts, I will aim wide. I will not kill you if I can help it. But if Dakota sees me hesitate, he will kill us both. So do not rely on my mercy." "Understood," Rowan said. "And one more thing." Kai stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Dakota plans to burn you out if you do not surrender. He has brought oil and torches. He will not wait long." Rowan's stomach dropped. The cabin was wood and stone, defensible but not fireproof. If they torched it, he and Ayla would have minutes before the smoke drove them out. And once they were outside in the open, they'd be slaughtered. "Thank you," he said quietly. Kai nodded, mounted his horse, and rode back up the canyon without another word. Ayla watched him go, her face pale. "We can't fight fire," she said. "I know." "So what do we do?" Rowan looked at the cabin, at the canyon walls, at the single narrow trail that led down to the desert floor. His mind raced through options, discarding them as fast as they came. Then an idea hit him, desperate. Probably doomed, but better than waiting to burn. "We don't fight them here," he said. "We move the fight somewhere they can't burn us out." "Where?" He pointed to the far end of the canyon, where the walls narrowed to a bottleneck barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. Beyond that, the land opened into a series of rocky arroyos and dried washes, terrain that favored defenders, that would force Dakota's group to split up, to expose themselves. "There," he said. "We make them come to us on our terms, and if they want you, they're going to have to earn it." Ayla stared at the bottleneck, then back at him. Slowly, her expression hardened into something fierce and determined. "All right," she said. "Let's make them earn it." They had until sunset. It would have to be enough. They spent the morning moving supplies. Ammunition first. Every round Rowan owned packed into saddlebags and carried to the bottleneck. Then water, dried food, blankets, anything they'd need if this turned into a siege. Ayla worked without complaining, even though Rowan could see the pain in her face every time she bent or lifted something heavy. Her wound was healing, but it wasn't healed, and pushing like this could undo weeks of recovery. He didn't tell her to stop. She wouldn't have listened anyway. By noon, they'd created a makeshift fortress in the narrow gap between the canyon walls. Rowan had piled rocks to form a low barrier just high enough to shoot over while staying protected. Behind it, the arroyo twisted back into a maze of stone channels and dead ends, escape routes if they needed them, or places to fall back if the position got overrun. It wasn't much, but it was better than burning alive in the cabin. Ayla crouched behind the barrier and sighted down her rifle, testing angles. "How far can you shoot accurately?" 200 yards, maybe 250 if the wind's right." "I can manage half that, maybe less." She lowered the weapon. "We're going to have to let them get close." "I know. And if they rush us all at once, we make every shot count." He met her eyes. "You ever kill anyone before?" She was quiet for a moment. "Once, a man tried to force himself on me outside a trading post. I put a knife in his throat." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't feel bad about it then. Don't feel bad about it now." "Good. Don't hesitate today. These men aren't coming to talk. I know what they're coming for." Her voice went flat. "And they're not getting it." The sun climbed higher, brutal and unforgiving. Rowan made them drink water even though neither was thirsty, checked and rechecked the rifles, counted ammunition for the 3rd time. Anything to keep moving, keep his mind from spiraling into all the ways this could go wrong. Around mid-afternoon, Ayla touched his arm. "Rowan." He looked up. On the far ridge, the riders had moved. They were descending into the canyon now, 6 of them in a loose line, taking their time, making a show of it. Rowan picked up his rifle and moved to the barrier. Ayla joined him, her face set and pale. "Here we go," she whispered. The riders stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. Dakota sat at the center, bigger up close than Rowan had realized, easily 6'2", broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that came from a lifetime of hard living. He wore traditional clothing, his face painted with red and black markings that Rowan didn't recognize. War paint, maybe. Or just intimidation. It was working. Dakota raised one hand and the others went still. Then he called out something in Apache, his voice carrying across the canyon like thunder. "What's he saying?" Rowan asked. Ayla's hands tightened on her rifle. "He says I have one chance to surrender. If I come now, willingly, he'll let you live. Let you right away. And if you don't?" He kills you slow, makes me watch, then takes me anyway. Charming guy. He means it, Rowan. Every word. Rowan raised his voice, calling out in English, "She's not going anywhere with you. Turn around and ride back before someone gets hurt." Dakota's expression didn't change. He said something else, shorter, sharper. "He says you speak words without understanding," Ayla translated, "that you are a dead man trying to bargain with his corpse. Tell him he's welcome to try." She hesitated, then called out in Apache. Her voice was strong, clear, and Rowan didn't need to understand the words to hear the defiance in them. Dakota's face went dark. He kicked his horse forward a few steps and shouted something back, angry now, the careful control slipping. "He says I've shamed him," Ayla said quietly. "That I've shamed my father and my family by lying with a white man. That when he's done with you, he'll make sure I never forget my place again." "I haven't touched you," Rowan said. "Doesn't matter. They see us together. They assume." She glanced at him. "And even if we told them the truth, they wouldn't believe it." Dakota raised his hand again and the riders spread out, forming a loose semicircle. Rowan's pulse kicked up. This was it. The talking was done. Then one of the riders broke formation, Kai, moving his horse forward slowly, his hands raised and empty. "Don't shoot," Ayla breathed. Rowan kept his rifle trained but didn't fire. Kai stopped about 50 yards out, close enough that they could see his face clearly. He looked sick, torn apart. "Cousin," he called in English, the word awkward in his mouth. "Please, this does not need to happen. Dakota will give you one more chance. Come now, and he will be merciful." "Merciful how?" Ayla shouted back. "He'll only beat me half to death instead of all the way? I do not—" Kai stopped, struggling. "I cannot stop this. I have tried. But if you do not come, he will kill the white man and take you by force. At least if you surrender, one of you lives." "Tell Dakota," Ayla said, her voice ringing across the canyon, "that I would rather die free than live one day as his wife. And if he wants me, he can come take me himself, if he's brave enough." The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Kai's face crumpled. "Ayla, no!" "Go back, Kai. You've done enough." For a moment it looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders sagged and he turned his horse around, riding back to the line. When he reached Dakota, the big warrior grabbed him by the arm and shoved him aside, snarling something that made Kai flinch. Dakota dismounted. So did the others, all except Kai, who stayed on his horse, his face turned away. This was happening, really happening. Rowan's hands went slick with sweat. He wiped them on his pants and tried to steady his breathing. Beside him, Ayla was doing the same, her chest rising and falling too fast. "You all right?" he asked. "No, you?" "No." "Good." She managed a weak smile. "Glad we're honest." Dakota and his men started walking forward, slow, confident, like they had all the time in the world. Rowan waited until they were at 75 yards. "That's close enough." They kept coming, 60 yards. "I said that's close enough." Still coming, 50 yards. Rowan sighted down the barrel and put the crosshairs on Dakota's chest. His finger touched the trigger, pressure building. A gunshot cracked across the canyon, not from Rowan, from behind the warriors. One of Dakota's men jerked and fell, a red spray erupting from his shoulder. The others scattered, diving for cover, and Rowan's head whipped around trying to find the shooter. There, on the ridge to the west. A lone figure with a rifle, too far to make out clearly. Another shot. Another man down, screaming and clutching his leg. Dakota roared something and his remaining men opened fire wildly, shooting at shadows. The figure on the ridge dropped out of sight, and for a moment everything went quiet except for the groaning of the wounded. Then Rowan saw him, the shooter sprinting down the slope toward their position, rifle in one hand. As he got closer, Rowan's stomach dropped. It was Kai. The young warrior hit the canyon floor running and didn't stop until he'd vaulted over the barrier and landed hard beside them, breathing like a bellows. "What the hell are you doing?" Ayla gasped. "Choosing," Kai panted. "I choose you. I choose right." He looked at Rowan. "And I choose to stop being a coward. Your chief will kill you for this. Perhaps. But at least I will die with honor." He raised his rifle and sighted toward where Dakota's men were regrouping. "Now shut up and shoot." Rowan didn't have time to argue. Dakota was screaming orders, and his 3 remaining fighters were spreading out, using rocks for cover, trying to flank the position. Rowan picked his target, a warrior trying to circle left, and fired. The man went down. Didn't get back up. Beside him, Ayla's rifle cracked. Her shot went wide, but close enough to make her target dive for cover. "Breathe," Rowan said. "Take your time." "Easy for you to say." Another volley came from Dakota's position. Bullets smacked into the rocks around them, spraying chips of stone. Rowan ducked, counted to 3, popped up, and fired again. Another hit. The warrior clutched his side and crawled behind a boulder, leaving a blood trail. 2 down, 2 wounded. That left Dakota and 1 other fighter still combat effective. Not bad odds. Except Dakota was worth 3 men on his own. The big warrior moved like liquid, flowing from cover to cover, never staying still long enough to draw a clean shot. He was working his way closer, using the terrain, and Rowan knew what he was planning. Get close enough to throw something, a knife, a torch, anything to make them break position. Once they were exposed, it was over. "Watch the right side," Rowan told Kai. "He's trying to flank." "I see him." Kai fired. The bullet sparked off a rock inches from Dakota's head, and the warrior jerked back with a curse that needed no translation. Then everything changed. The wounded fighter Ayla had hit earlier surged up from behind his boulder and charged, howling, a knife in each hand. He was bleeding badly, running on rage and adrenaline, and he covered the ground between them in seconds. Ayla swung her rifle around, but he was too close, too fast. He crashed into her and they went down in a tangle of limbs, the knives flashing. Rowan spun and fired point blank. The shot took the warrior in the side, punching through ribs. He folded and went still. But the damage was done. Ayla was on the ground, her rifle lost, blood spreading across her shirt from a gash along her ribs. Not the old wound, a new one, fresh and deep. "Ayla!" Rowan dropped beside her, trying to see how bad it was. "I'm fine," she gasped. "Get up, they're coming." She was right. Dakota and his last fighter were rushing the position, using the distraction. Kai was shooting, but they were moving too fast, zigzagging, making themselves hard targets. Rowan grabbed his rifle and fired. Missed. The slide locked back. Empty. He dropped it and went for his pistol, but Dakota was already there, vaulting the barrier like it wasn't even there, his face twisted with fury. Rowan got the pistol up just as Dakota's boot caught him in the chest. The kick lifted him off his feet and slammed him into the rock wall behind them. The pistol went flying. His vision grayed out and he tasted copper. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Kai shout, heard another gunshot. Then Dakota was on him, one massive hand closing around his throat, lifting him, choking the life out of him with mechanical efficiency. Rowan clawed at the hand, couldn't break the grip. His lungs burned. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. Then Ayla was there. The knife Kai had given Rowan days ago clutched in her fist. She drove it into Dakota's shoulder, buried it to the hilt. Dakota roared and dropped Rowan, spinning to face her. He ripped the knife out and threw it aside like it was nothing, blood pouring from the wound, and Rowan saw the moment Ayla realized she'd just made everything worse. The big warrior backhanded her across the face. She went down hard. Rowan tried to stand, couldn't get his legs to work. His vision was still swimming, his throat on fire. Dakota stood over Ayla, breathing hard, blood running down his arm. He said something in Apache, quiet this time, almost conversational, and bent to grab her. She spat in his face. His expression went blank, flat, dangerous. Then the back of his head exploded. Dakota dropped like a felled tree, his body hitting the ground with a meaty thud. Behind where he'd stood, rifle still smoking, was Kai. The young warrior was shaking so hard the rifle barrel wavered. He stared at what he'd done, at his cousin's body, and his face went gray. "I killed him," he whispered. "I killed Dakota." "You saved her," Rowan rasped, his voice like gravel. "You saved both of us." "The chief will never forgive this. My family—" Kai's legs gave out, and he sat down hard, still staring. "What have I done?" Rowan forced himself upright and stumbled to Ayla. She was conscious, but dazed, blood running from a split lip and the gash in her side. He pressed his hand to the wound and she hissed in pain. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough. We need to get pressure on it, get you inside." "The others," she said. "Where are the others?" Rowan looked around. 2 warriors down and dead, 1 wounded and crawling away into the rocks. The last one. Gone. Fled. Probably running back to the chief right now with news of what happened, which meant they had hours. Maybe less. We need to move, Rowan said. Now. Once word gets back to your father, he will come with everyone, Kai said hollowly. Every warrior. And he will not accept surrender. Ayla struggled to sit up, wincing. Then we run. All 3 of us. We take the horses and we run until we find somewhere they can't follow. There is nowhere, Kai said. You do not understand. I have killed Dakota, the chief's chosen champion. There is no exile for this, no forgiveness, only blood. So what are you saying? Rowan demanded. We just sit here and wait to die? No. Kai stood slowly, some of the color returning to his face. You run. I stay. I tell the chief I acted alone, that I betrayed my people for love of my cousin. They will kill me, but they will let you go. Like hell, Ayla said. It is the only way. I'm not letting you die for me. You already let me make this choice, Kai's voice cracked. When I shot those men, I knew what it meant. I knew I could never go home. So let me finish it. Let me do one good thing before the end. No. Ayla grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. No, you come with us. We all go together. Where? There's nowhere. Then we make somewhere. She looked at Rowan. You said the canyon had 2 ways out. Where does the other path go? Rowan's mind raced. The east trail was narrow, barely wide enough for a horse, and it climbed up through terrain so rough most people avoided it. But it led out to the Badlands, miles of broken country that nobody claimed, too harsh to settle, too dangerous to cross. Badlands, he said. 3, maybe 4 days' ride. Nothing out there but scorpions and rattlesnakes. Can we survive it? Maybe, if we're lucky. Then that's where we go. She turned back to Kai. All of us. We disappear into country so bad even my father won't follow, and we figure out the rest later. Kai stared at her, then at Rowan, searching for the lie. When he didn't find one, his shoulders sagged. You are both insane, he said. Probably, Rowan agreed. You coming or not? For a long moment Kai didn't answer, then slowly he nodded. I am coming. Good. Then help me get her on her feet. We've got about 2 hours before this place is crawling with warriors, and I'd like to be gone before they arrive. They moved fast, gathering what supplies they could carry, leaving everything else. Rowan wrapped Ayla's side as best he could, tight enough to slow the bleeding, but not so tight she couldn't breathe. She was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line against the pain, but she didn't complain. Kai gathered weapons from the fallen warriors, a better rifle than his own, ammunition, a knife that looked like it had been in his family for generations. He hesitated over Dakota's body, then bent and closed the dead man's eyes. I am sorry, cousin, he whispered. You were a hard man, but you did not deserve this. He tried to take her by force, Rowan said. He deserved exactly this. Perhaps. Kai stood. But I will carry it anyway. They mounted up, Ayla on the mare despite her protests that she could ride alone, Rowan and Kai on their own horses. The sun was dropping toward the horizon now, painting the canyon walls orange and red. Beautiful, like the desert was saying goodbye. Rowan led them up the east trail, picking his way carefully over loose stone and treacherous footing. Behind them, the canyon fell away, the cabin growing smaller, the battlefield where they'd made their stand already looking like ancient history. None of them looked back. They rode through the evening and into the night, pushing until the horses were stumbling and Ayla was swaying in the saddle. Finally, Rowan called a halt in a sheltered draw, and they made camp without a fire, huddled together against the cold. Ayla's wound had bled through the bandage. Rowan changed it by moonlight, cleaning the gash as best he could with water and strips torn from his spare shirt. It wasn't deep enough to kill her, but it was going to hurt like hell for weeks. I'm fine, she said for the 3rd time. You're not, but you're alive. He tied off the bandage. That'll have to do for now. Kai sat apart from them, his back against a boulder, staring at nothing. His hands were still shaking. Rowan moved to sit beside him. You all right? No. Yeah, stupid question. They were quiet for a while. Then Kai spoke, his voice low. I have never killed anyone before today. I thought it would feel different, important maybe. Instead, it just feels wrong, like I broke something that cannot be fixed. You did, Rowan said. That doesn't go away. It just becomes part of you. How do you live with it? Badly most of the time. Rowan rubbed his face. But you remember why you did it. You hold on to that, and you try to make sure it wasn't for nothing. And if it was, then you keep going anyway, because the alternative is worse. Kai absorbed that. Is this what it was like for you? In the cavalry? Sometimes. Other times it was worse. Rowan looked at him. But what you did today, saving Ayla, standing up to Dakota, that took more courage than anything I did in the war. Because you gave up everything for it. Your home, your family, your future. I never had that choice. I just followed orders and pretended it wasn't my fault. Do you believe that? That it was not your fault? No, but I'm working on it. Kai nodded slowly. After a moment, he extended his hand. Rowan looked at it, surprised, then gripped it firmly. Thank you, Kai said, for not leaving me behind. Thank you for not letting them kill us. We are even, then. Yeah, we're even. They sat in companionable silence until Ayla called out softly. You two done bonding? Because I'm freezing and could use some body heat. Despite everything, Rowan smiled. They moved closer to her, the three of them huddled together under the single blanket, sharing warmth in the cold desert night. Somewhere behind them, the canyon burned. Rowan knew it even though he couldn't see it. Knew Dakota's men had made it back. Knew the chief had given orders. Knew everything they'd left behind was ash now. It didn't matter. They were alive. They were together. And tomorrow they'd keep running. But tonight, just for a few hours, they could rest. Sick. The Badlands were worse than Rowan remembered. They spent the next 3 days crossing terrain that seemed designed to kill anything stupid enough to enter it. Jagged rocks that tore at the horses' hooves. Dry washes that turned into flash floods, with no warning when distant storms broke. Heat that baked them during the day, and cold that froze them at night. Ayla's wound got infected again despite Rowan's best efforts. The fever came back, milder this time, but still dangerous, and they had to stop twice so she could rest. She fought it with the same stubborn determination she brought to everything else, refusing to slow them down, refusing to admit how much pain she was in. Kai proved surprisingly good at survival. He knew which plants were edible, which were poison, where to find water in country that looked bone dry. He set snares and caught rabbits, kept watch while the others slept, never complained even when his own feet were bleeding from the miles. They'd become a unit, a strange, broken family held together by necessity and something deeper that none of them wanted to name. On the fourth day, they crested a rise and saw it. A valley, small, hidden between cliffs that made it invisible from any direction but this one. A creek ran through the center, lined with cottonwoods. Grass grew thick on the banks. It was green, alive, impossible. Is this real? Ayla breathed. I think so, Rowan said. Kai was already scanning the cliffs, the approaches, his tactical mind working. Defensible. One way in. Water, food, shelter. If we could build here, we'd have to build from nothing, Rowan interrupted. No supplies, no tools except what we're carrying. It'd be hard. Harder than dying? Ayla asked. He looked at her. She was filthy, exhausted, her face still swollen from where Dakota had hit her. The bandage around her ribs was stained with blood and dirt. She should have looked broken. Instead, she looked fierce, determined, like she was daring the universe to try taking this from her. No, Rowan admitted. Not harder than dying. They descended into the valley as the sun set, painting everything gold. The horses smelled the water and picked up their pace, nearly running the last 100 yards to the creek. They drank deep while the riders dismounted and just stood there, taking it in. We could stay, Kai said quietly. Build something here. Start over. They'd find us eventually, Rowan said. Maybe. Or maybe the Badlands scared them off. Maybe your father decided we were not worth the trouble. Kai looked at Ayla. Maybe we get to be free. She didn't answer right away, just walked to the creek and knelt beside it, cupping water in her hands and drinking. When she'd had her fill, she turned to face them. I don't believe in maybe, she said. I believe in what we can build, what we can hold. She gestured at the valley. This is real. Water, land, space to breathe. That's more than I've had in years. So yes, we stay, we build, and if my father comes, we fight, Rowan finished. We fight. Kai smiled, tired but genuine. Then I suppose we should start building. They made camp that night properly. A real fire, food cooked instead of eaten cold, the luxury of washing in the creek. Ayla's fever had broken again, and though she was still weak, she was moving better. Rowan changed her bandage and saw that the infection was finally clearing. You're going to make it, he said. Took you long enough to figure that out. I'm slow. You're careful. There's a difference. She touched his hand. Thank you for everything. For not giving up on me even when you should have. I never should have. You know what I mean. He did. And he didn't have words for what he felt, so he just squeezed her hand and hoped that was enough. Later, after Kai had fallen asleep by the fire, Ayla and Rowan sat together on the creek bank, listening to the water move. Do you think they'll come? She asked. Eventually. Your father's not the type to let something like this go. No, he's not. She was quiet for a moment. When they do come, I want you to know, whatever happens, I don't regret any of it. Running, fighting, all of it. I'd rather have 1 year of this than a lifetime of what Dakota was offering. It's not going to be 1 year. You don't know that. No, Rowan agreed, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. She leaned her head against his shoulder and they sat like that, watching the stars come out. Two people who'd run as far as they could and found something worth staying for. The valley was silent, except for the creek and the wind and the sound of Kai's soft snoring. It felt like peace. It felt like home. And if it was temporary, if the world came crashing down tomorrow or next week or next year, well, they'd deal with that when it happened. For now, they had this. And this was enough. 3 weeks passed. They built a shelter from fallen logs and woven branches, crude but functional. Rowan showed them how to make it weather-tight, how to create a fire pit that wouldn't fill the space with smoke. Kai hunted, bringing back deer and rabbits. Ayla foraged, finding edible plants and medicinal herbs, slowly rebuilding their supplies. They fell into a rhythm. Work during the day, rest at night. Small conversations around the fire. Laughter sometimes, when someone told a story or made a joke that landed right. It felt normal. Almost. But they all knew it wouldn't last. Rowan was checking the snares one morning when he saw the smoke. 3 columns, rising in the distance, evenly spaced, deliberate, a signal. He ran back to the shelter, his heart pounding. Ayla and Kai were already outside, staring at the smoke. They found us, Kai said flatly. How many? Ayla asked. Can't tell from here, but if they're signaling, it means they're coordinating, multiple groups. Rowan's mind raced. We've got maybe a day, maybe less. Then we leave, Kai said. Now, before they surround us. And go where? Ayla demanded. We're in the middle of the Badlands with barely enough supplies to survive here. If we run, we die in the desert. If we stay, we die here. So we fight. Against how many? 10? 20? Kai shook his head. We cannot win this. We don't have to win. We just have to make it too expensive for them to keep trying. Rowan looked between them, seeing the fear, the determination, the exhaustion of people who'd been running too long and couldn't run anymore. Kai's right, he said quietly. We can't win a straight fight. But Ayla's also right. We can make it hurt, make them bleed for every inch, and maybe, if we're lucky, they'll decide we're not worth it. And if they do not? Kai asked. Rowan met his eyes. Then we go down swinging. They spent the day preparing, setting traps along the approaches, creating fallback positions, stockpiling ammunition in strategic spots. It was the same work they'd done at the canyon, but this time they had more space, more options, more hope. As the sun set, they gathered at the shelter one last time. Ayla's wound had healed enough that she could move without grimacing, though Rowan knew it still hurt. Kai was quiet, his face set in grim determination. Rowan checked his weapons for the 100th time and tried not to think about how many ways this could go wrong. Whatever happens tomorrow, Ayla said quietly, I want you both to know you're my family. The only one that matters. You are ours as well, Kai said. Rowan just nodded, his throat too tight for words. They sat together as darkness fell. Three people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and somehow made it work, and waited for morning to bring whatever came next. In the distance, unseen but certain, an army was coming, and they would be ready. Dawn came cold and quiet. Rowan woke first, his body trained by years of military routine to rise before the sun. He lay still for a moment, listening. The creek burbled. A bird called somewhere in the cottonwoods. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. But beneath them, carried on the wind, he could hear something else. Voices. Distant but distinct. The soft clink of metal on metal. Horses moving through brush. They were here. He sat up carefully, not wanting to wake the others yet, and moved to the edge of the shelter. The valley was still shrouded in pre-dawn gray, but he could see movement on the ridge to the east. Shapes. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. His stomach turned over. How many? Ayla's voice quiet behind him. He turned. She was awake, sitting up with the blanket pulled around her waist, her rifle already in her hands. Kai stirred beside her, his eyes opening, instantly alert. Can't tell yet, Rowan said. At least 12 on the East Ridge. Probably more we can't see. My father wouldn't send less than 20 for this, Ayla said. Maybe 30 if he's serious about ending it. He's serious. Kai stood and moved to join them at the entrance. I know him. He will not accept this insult. Dakota was to be his war chief. His death demands blood. The three of them stood together, watching the ridge lighten as the sun climbed. Slowly the shapes resolved into riders. Rowan counted under his breath. 23. His mouth went dry. We're outnumbered 7-1, he said. 8-1 if you count properly, Kai corrected. I am not much of a fighter. You killed Dakota. From behind, with a rifle. Not the same as facing a warrior in combat. Well, you're going to learn today. Rowan checked his ammunition. 40 rounds for the rifle, maybe 15 for the pistol. Not nearly enough. We stick to the plan. Slow them down at the approaches, fall back to the secondary positions, make them work for every yard. With luck, we thin their numbers enough that they reconsider. And without luck? Ayla asked. He didn't answer, didn't need to. The riders on the ridge weren't moving yet, just sitting there letting themselves be seen. Rowan recognized the tactic, psychological warfare. Make the enemy wait, let the fear build, watch them break before the first shot is fired. It had worked on plenty of men he'd known, but it wouldn't work today. Breakfast, Rowan said. Quick. We eat while we can. They choked down dried meat and water, none of them tasting it, their eyes on the ridge. The sun cleared the horizon and turned the valley golden. Beautiful. It would have been a perfect morning if not for the armed men preparing to kill them. One of the riders detached from the group and started down into the valley, alone, unarmed, as far as Rowan could tell. That's my father, Ayla said quietly. The chief rode slowly, taking his time, his posture straight and proud. Even from a distance, Rowan could see the resemblance, the same strong jaw, the same sharp eyes. But where Ayla's face held defiance, her father's held only cold certainty. He stopped about 50 yards from the shelter and dismounted. For a long moment, he just stood there, studying them. Then he spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the valley. Ayla translated, her voice tight. He says this is my last chance. If I come now, willingly, he will spare Kai's life. He will even let the white man leave with his horse and weapons. But I must come now, and I must accept marriage to Dakota's younger brother, who has claimed the right to avenge his family's honor. Tell him no, Rowan said. He is my father. I should tell him no. Ayla looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to her father and spoke in Apache. Her voice was clear, strong, and Rowan heard the finality in it even without understanding the words. The chief's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once, as if confirming something he'd already known. Then he spoke again, shorter this time, sharper. He says we have chosen death, Ayla translated, that he will give us until midday to prepare ourselves. After that, his warriors will come, and they will not stop until all three of us are dead. Why midday? Kai asked. Why give us time? Because he is giving me a chance to change my mind, to realize the mistake I've made. Ayla's jaw tightened. And because he wants me to spend the morning in fear, knowing what's coming. The chief mounted his horse and rode back up the ridge without another word. The sun climbed higher, the valley grew warm, and they waited. Then, the attack came at noon exactly. The warriors spread out in a wide line and descended into the valley on foot, using cover, advancing in coordinated groups. Professional, disciplined. These weren't raiders or hot-headed young men looking for glory. These were experienced fighters who'd done this before. Rowan, Ayla, and Kai were positioned behind a natural barricade of rocks near the valley's entrance. The bottleneck they'd chosen because it forced attackers to bunch up, limited their numbers' advantage. Rowan had the center position with the best field of fire. Ayla was on his left, Kai on his right. The first group of warriors reached 100 yards out. Rowan sighted on the lead man and waited. His heart was hammering, but his hands were steady. This part he knew. This part he'd done before. "Wait for my shot," he said quietly. 80 yards, 60, 50. He squeezed the trigger. The lead warrior dropped. The others scattered, diving for cover, and suddenly the valley erupted with gunfire. Bullets smacked into the rocks around them, spraying chips of stone. Rowan ducked, counted to 3, came up, and fired again. Another hit. Beside him, Ayla was shooting carefully, taking her time between shots. Her third bullet caught a warrior in the leg, and he went down screaming. Kai fired and missed. Fired again. Another miss. His hands were shaking. "Breathe," Rowan told him. "Pick one target. Just one. Focus on him." Kai nodded, took a breath, aimed. This time when he fired, a warrior jerked and stumbled. Not a kill shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. "Good," Rowan said. "Keep doing that." The warriors regrouped and tried a different approach, splitting into 2 groups, one pressing from the front while the other circled to flank. Rowan saw it happening and cursed. "Kai, watch the right side. They're trying to get around us." "I see them!" The flanking group was moving fast, using the creek bed for cover. Smart. It would bring them in close, too close for rifle work. If they made it to melee range, this fight was over. Rowan shifted his aim and started putting rounds into the creek bed. Couldn't see his targets clearly, just shapes moving through the brush, but he fired anyway. Suppression. Make them keep their heads down. Slow them down. One of the shapes broke from cover, sprinting for a boulder closer to their position. Ayla swung her rifle and fired. The warrior's legs went out from under him, and he went down hard, not moving. "Nice shot," Rowan said. "He was my second cousin," Ayla replied, her voice flat. "He taught me to fish when I was 6. Rowan didn't know what to say to that, so he just kept shooting. The battle settled into a rhythm. The warriors would advance, take fire, fall back, regroup and try again from a different angle. Each time, Rowan and his group would drive them off, but it was costing them. Ammunition was running low. Kai had taken a graze across his shoulder that was bleeding steadily. Ayla's hands were torn up from handling the hot rifle barrel, and the warriors kept coming. Around mid-afternoon, there was a lull. The attacking force pulled back to the ridge and stayed there, regrouping. Rowan used the break to check their ammunition. "I'm down to my last magazine," he said. "Maybe 10 rounds." "I have 6, Ayla said. 4, Kai added. 20 rounds total, against at least 15 warriors still combat effective. The math didn't work. "We need to fall back," Rowan said. "Now, while they're regrouping, get to the secondary position. Make them work for it again." "And after that?" Kai asked. "After that, we improvise." They gathered what they could carry and retreated deeper into the valley, moving to a position near the creek where they'd stacked rocks into a rough semicircle. It was more exposed than the first position, but it had good sight lines and access to water. They'd barely gotten settled when the warriors came again. This time they didn't bother with tactics, just charged straight in, overwhelming force, accepting casualties to close the distance. Rowan fired until the rifle clicked empty, dropped it, and drew his pistol. Beside him, Ayla did the same. The warriors hit their position like a wave. Rowan shot the first one at 5 feet, the second at 3. Then they were on him, and it was all hand-to-hand, brutal and close. He blocked a knife thrust, twisted the warrior's arm until something snapped, shoved him away, and fired into the next attacker. Kai was fighting with his rifle like a club, swinging wildly, keeping 2 warriors at bay through sheer desperation. One of them got through his guard and slashed across his ribs. Kai screamed and went down. Ayla dove for him, trying to protect him, and a warrior grabbed her from behind. She drove her elbow into his gut, spun and raked her fingernails across his face. He stumbled back, blood streaming from the gouges, and she kicked him in the knee hard enough that Rowan heard it pop. Then a gunshot cracked from somewhere outside the melee, and everything stopped. Not from their side, from the ridge. The chief's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. The warriors froze, breathing hard, weapons raised. Slowly, reluctantly, they pulled back. Rowan stood in the center of the defensive position, his pistol trained on the nearest warrior, his chest heaving. Ayla was on the ground next to Kai, pressing her hand to the wound in his side. Kai's face was gray, his breathing shallow. The chief rode down into the valley again. This time he didn't stop at a distance. He rode right up to them, his expression carved from stone. He looked at his daughter, at the bodies scattered around the creek, at the blood soaking into the ground. When he spoke, his voice was tired. Ayla translated, her voice shaking. He says this is madness, that we cannot win, that all we are doing is dying slowly when we could end it with honor. Tell him we'll keep dying as long as it takes, Rowan said. He knows. She looked up at her father and said something in Apache. He shook his head. She said something else, louder, her voice breaking. The chief's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or regret. He spoke again, and this time his voice was quieter. He says he is tired, Ayla translated, that he has lost too much already. Dakota, Kai, half a dozen good warriors, and now his daughter, who chooses death over family. She paused. He asks if I truly hate him so much that I would choose a white man and a traitor over my own blood. What do you want to say? Rowan asked quietly. Ayla looked at her father for a long moment. Then she spoke in English, clear and deliberate, so Rowan and Kai could understand. I do not hate you, father, but I will not be owned. Not by Dakota, not by his brother, not by tradition that values my obedience more than my life. You taught me to be strong, to fight for what matters. And then you told me the only fight that mattered was the one for your honor. She stood slowly, still pressing her hand to Kai's wound. So yes, I choose them. Not because they are better than you, but because they see me as a person, not a problem to be solved. The chief was silent for a long time. Then he looked at Rowan, really looked, seeing past the enemy to the man beneath. You love her, he said in careful, accented English. The question caught Rowan off guard. He glanced at Ayla, saw her watching him, waiting for the answer. Yes, he said, I do. Even knowing it will kill you? Especially knowing that. The chief's expression softened, just a fraction. He looked old suddenly, worn down by choices that had no good answers. I cannot allow this, he said. Cannot let my daughter live with a white man. Cannot forgive Kai's betrayal. My people would see it as weakness, would challenge my authority. I would lose everything. Then you've already lost, Rowan said, because the only thing you had worth keeping was her, and you chose pride over her, chose tradition over family. That's not strength, that's cowardice. The chief's jaw tightened. For a moment, Rowan thought he'd gone too far, that the old man would order his warriors to finish it right now. But instead, the chief just looked sad. You are right, he said quietly. And you are wrong. You do not understand what it is to lead, to carry the weight of a people's survival on your shoulders. Every choice I make affects hundreds. My daughter's happiness is small in comparison. No, Ayla said fiercely. It's everything. And if you can't see that, then you're not the man I thought you were. The chief flinched like she'd struck him. He stared at her, this daughter who'd defied him at every turn, who'd chosen freedom over safety, love over duty. And something in his face broke. He dismounted and walked toward them slowly. The warriors tensed, hands moving to weapons, but he waved them back. He stopped a few feet from Ayla and spoke in Apache, his voice rough with emotion. Ayla's eyes widened. Father! He shook his head and continued, the words coming faster now. Rowan couldn't understand them, but he could hear the pain in them, the regret. When the chief finished, Ayla was crying. Not sobbing, just tears running down her face, cutting tracks through the dirt and blood. What did he say? Rowan asked. She took a shaky breath. He said that when my mother died, he promised her he would keep me safe, that he would make sure I survived in a world that wanted to destroy people like us, And he thought the only way to do that was to make me strong through tradition, through marriage to a powerful warrior, through belonging to the tribe. She wiped at her eyes. But he forgot that she also made him promise to let me choose my own path, to let me be free. The chief spoke again, shorter this time. He says he cannot give us his blessing, Ayla translated, but he will not hunt us anymore. He will tell the tribe that we died here in this valley, that Kai was killed defending his chief's honor, and the white man and I were lost to the Badlands. She looked at her father. He is giving us a chance to disappear. And the cost? Rowan asked, because there was always a cost. The chief met his eyes and spoke in English again. The cost is you must truly disappear. You cannot return to Apache lands, cannot contact the tribe. You are dead to us. All three of you. He looked at Kai, who was barely conscious. Even him. I accept, Kai whispered. Ayla? The chief asked. She looked at Rowan, then at Kai, then back at her father. I accept. The chief nodded. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small leather pouch, pressing it into Ayla's hands. From your mother, he said. She wanted you to have it. I kept it, thinking I would give it to you on your wedding day. But I think she would want you to have it now. Ayla opened the pouch and pulled out a silver necklace, simple and beautiful, with a small turquoise stone. Her hand closed around it and she made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Thank you, she whispered. The chief reached out, hesitated, then placed his hand on her head. A blessing, maybe, or just a goodbye. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. Before mounting, he called out to his warriors in Apache. They began gathering their wounded and dead, preparing to leave. Rowan helped Ayla bandage Kai's wound properly. The cut was deep but clean, and Kai was young and strong. He'd survive. Probably. As the warriors filed out of the valley, the chief stopped one last time and looked back. White man, he called. Rowan straightened. Yeah? If you hurt her, I will know, and I will come back. No mercy, no second chance. Understood. The chief nodded once and rode away. Within minutes, the valley was empty except for the three of them and the bodies they'd leave for the scavengers. Rowan sank to the ground, exhaustion hitting him all at once. Ayla collapsed beside him, her head on his shoulder. Kai was already unconscious, his breathing steady enough to suggest sleep rather than shock. Is it over? Ayla asked. Yeah, Rowan said. I think it is. What do we do now? We rest. We heal. Then we figure out what comes next. And if I don't know what comes next? He took her hand and squeezed it gently. Then we figure it out together. She turned her face into his shoulder and started to cry in earnest, not from pain or fear, but from relief, from the sudden absence of all the pressure she'd been carrying for so long. Rowan held her and let her cry, and for the first time in years he felt something other than guilt or shame or the weight of ghosts. He felt hope. They stayed in the valley for 2 months while Kai healed. The wound in his side had gotten infected despite their best efforts, and for a week they weren't sure he'd make it. But he was stubborn, and Ayla was relentless about changing bandages and forcing medicine down his throat, and slowly he pulled through. During those 2 months, they built a real shelter, not the rough structure they'd thrown together in 3 days, but an actual cabin with a proper roof and walls chinked against the wind. Rowan taught them techniques he'd learned in the cavalry, how to square logs, how to build a chimney that wouldn't fill the place with smoke, how to make a door that actually hung straight. It was hard work, the kind that made your back ache and your hands bleed and your whole body scream for rest. But it was good work, honest work, work that built something instead of tearing it down. Ayla proved surprisingly good with her hands. She could weave willow branches into baskets, tan hides into usable leather, turn clay from the creek bank into pots that didn't crack when fired. She worked with a focus that suggested she was trying to prove something to herself. And Rowan didn't push her to explain what. Kai recovered slowly, his natural humor returning as the pain faded. He'd sit outside and offer commentary while they worked, making jokes that were terrible enough to be funny. Once, when Rowan was struggling to lift a beam into place, Kai called out, "Perhaps if the white man had eaten more as a child, he would be stronger. Perhaps if the Apache warrior helped instead of talking, the job would be done," Rowan shot back. But then who would provide the entertainment? Even Ayla laughed at that. As the cabin took shape, so did something else. A rhythm, a sense of belonging. They each had roles that emerged naturally. Rowan handled the heavy construction and hunting, Ayla managed the domestic work and foraging, Kai kept watch and gradually took over the fishing as his mobility returned. Nobody had to assign the work. It just happened. One evening, sitting around the fire after a long day, Kai looked at the cabin and shook his head. "I never thought I would build a home with a white man and my rebel cousin," he said. "If you had told me this a year ago, I would have laughed." "And now?" Ayla asked. "Now I think it is the best thing I have ever done." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Strange how the worst day of your life can lead to the best." "Is that what this is?" Rowan asked. "The best? It is for me. I have no family to disappoint, no chief to follow. I wake up and decide what my day will be. That is," he struggled for the word, "freedom, yes? That is freedom." "Yeah," Rowan said quietly. "That's freedom." Ayla was quiet, staring into the flames. After a moment, she spoke. "My mother used to say that home isn't a place. It's the people who see you for who you are and choose to stay anyway." She looked at them. "I think I finally understand what she meant." Rowan reached over and took her hand. Kai smiled and turned back to the fire, giving them space. Later that night, after Kai had gone to sleep inside, Rowan and Ayla stayed outside under the stars. The valley was quiet except for the creek and the occasional call of a nightbird. "Do you think your father kept his word?" Rowan asked. "About telling the tribe we're dead?" "I don't know. I hope so." She leaned against him. "But even if he didn't, we're so far out here that it doesn't matter. The Badlands are big enough to swallow people who want to be swallowed. And you want to be?" "Swallowed? No. But lost? Maybe, for a while." She tilted her head to look up at him. "Is that all right with you?" "Being lost with you?" He smiled. "Yeah, that's all right with me." She kissed him then, soft and careful, like she was testing to see if this was real. He kissed her back and felt something settle in his chest. Some piece he hadn't known was missing, clicking into place. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "I love you," she said. "I don't know when it happened, but it did. And I needed you to know." "I love you too," he replied. "Have for a while now. Just didn't know how to say it." "You say it by staying, by building this with me, by choosing to be here when you could have run a dozen times." "I'm done running." "Good." She settled back against his chest. "Because I'd hate to have to chase you." They sat like that until the fire burned low and the cold drove them inside, where Kai was snoring peacefully in the corner. Rowan and Ayla lay down on their bedroll, wrapped in blankets in each other. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Rowan slept without dreaming of ghosts. 6 months after the battle, they had visitors. Rowan spotted them from the ridge where he'd been hunting, 2 riders approaching from the east. Not Apache. The horses were wrong, the riding style different. He watched through the scope of his rifle, trying to identify them. When he did, his stomach dropped. One of the riders was wearing a cavalry uniform. He scrambled down the ridge and ran back to the cabin, his mind racing. They'd been so careful, covering their tracks, avoiding settlements. How had anyone found them? Ayla met him at the door, alarmed by his expression. "What's wrong?" "Riders, 2 of them. One's cavalry." Her face went pale. "How close?" "Maybe 30 minutes out." Kai appeared from inside, his hand already on his rifle. "Do we run?" "Where?" Rowan shook his head. "They know where we are. Running just delays the inevitable." "Then we fight," Ayla said. "No." Rowan set down his rifle. "We talk, see what they want. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe they're just passing through. And if they're not, then we deal with it." The riders arrived 20 minutes later. Rowan, Ayla, and Kai stood outside the cabin, presenting a united front. As the riders got closer, Rowan's heart nearly stopped. The one in uniform was a cavalry officer, captain's bars on his shoulders, older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a weathered face. The other rider was a woman, young, mid-20s, with dark hair and Rowan's eyes. His sister. "Rowan?" Her voice cracked. "Rowan, is that you?" He couldn't speak, couldn't move, just stood there staring at a ghost-made flesh, a piece of his past he thought was gone forever. She dismounted and walked toward him, slow, like she was afraid he might disappear. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped. "It's me," she said. "It's Sarah, your sister. Please tell me you remember me." "I remember," he managed. I thought you'd forgotten about me." "Forgotten?" She laughed, but it came out broken. "I've been looking for you for 4 years, ever since the war ended and you didn't come home. I hired investigators, sent letters to every fort and outpost, followed every rumor." Tears were running down her face. "And then 3 months ago, someone told me there was an ex-cavalry scout living in the Badlands with an Apache woman and a deserter, and I knew it had to be you." The cavalry officer stepped forward. "Ma'am asked me to escort her out here, make sure she got through safe. I'm Captain Williams, Fort Grant. I knew your brother during the war, good soldier, saved my life at Canyon Ridge." Rowan barely heard him. He was staring at Sarah, at this woman who'd traveled across a desert looking for a brother who'd abandoned her, who'd spent years refusing to give up hope. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you look for me?" "Because you're my brother, because I love you, because I wasn't going to let you disappear just because you were too stubborn to ask for help." Something in Rowan's chest cracked open. 4 years of guilt, of shame, of carrying the weight alone, and here was someone who'd known what he'd done, what he'd become, and had come looking anyway. He closed the distance and pulled her into a hug. She held on to him like she was afraid he'd vanish, and he held her back just as tight. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know. It's all right. You're here now, that's what matters." They stood like that for a long time. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was smiling through her tears. "Are you going to introduce me?" she asked, looking at Ayla and Kai. Rowan turned. "This is Ayla and Kai. They're my family." Sarah studied them both, taking in the defensive postures, the weapons within easy reach, the way they'd positioned themselves to protect each other. Then she smiled. "It's nice to meet you both." Captain Williams cleared his throat. "I should mention, officially I'm not here. There are no records of this trip. As far as the Army's concerned, Rowan Vance died in the Badlands a year ago." "Why would you do that?" Ayla asked suspiciously. "Because I owed him my life. And because sometimes the right thing to do isn't the official thing." He looked at Rowan. "But I need to know, are you planning to stay here? Or are you thinking of coming back to civilization?" Rowan glanced at Ayla, then at Kai, then at the cabin they'd built together. "We're staying," he said. "This is home now." Williams nodded. "Then my advice is to keep your heads down. Don't draw attention. The territory's changing. More settlements, more law, more eyes watching. You'll be safe here for now, but in a few years?" He shrugged. "Who knows?" "We'll take our chances," Ayla said. The captain smiled. "I believe you will." He turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, we should head back before dark." "Can I have a moment?" she asked. "Take your time." Sarah pulled Rowan aside, out of earshot of the others. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Really happy? Or are you just hiding out here because you're too scared to face the world?" It was the same question he'd been asking himself for months, the same doubt that crept in late at night when the old ghost came calling. "Both," he admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Other days I feel like I'm a coward playing house in the middle of nowhere." He looked at Ayla. "But then I see her, see what we're building, and I think, maybe this is what redemption looks like. Not grand gestures or going back to fix the past. Just building something good in the present." Sarah followed his gaze. "You love her." "Yeah." "And she loves you?" "She says she does." "Then that's enough." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'm not going to ask you to come back. I can see this is where you need to be. But promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll write. Send letters to Fort Grant addressed to me. Even if it's just a few lines once a year, let me know you're alive. Let me be part of your life, even from a distance." Rowan felt his throat tighten. "I promise." She hugged him again, fierce and quick. Then she stepped back, wiping her eyes. "Take care of yourself, big brother." "You too, Sarah." She mounted her horse and rode away with Captain Williams, and Rowan stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge. When he finally turned around, Ayla was waiting. "You all right?" she asked. Yeah, I think I am. She seems nice, your sister. She is. Too good for a brother like me. Maybe. But she came looking anyway. That means something. It did. It meant that maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. That maybe the people who mattered didn't need him to be perfect. Just present. Kai appeared from the cabin with 3 cups of coffee. So, your sister found you. That is good, yes? Yeah, Rowan said. It's good. And the captain will keep your secret? He will. Then we celebrate. Kai raised his cup. To family. Blood and chosen. They drank to that as the sun set over the valley. 3 people who'd found each other in violence and built something better in its aftermath. The years passed. Not quickly, but not slowly either. Just steadily. The way time moves when you're living instead of just surviving. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room and a proper porch. Built a barn for the horses and chickens they'd traded for at a distant settlement. Cleared land for a small garden where Ayla grew vegetables and herbs. Her hands in the soil, her face content in a way Rowan had never seen in those early days. Kai became a skilled hunter and craftsman. He made bows that shot straight and true, arrows that could bring down deer at 50 yards. He taught Rowan and Ayla Apache techniques for tracking and wilderness survival, and in return they taught him to read and write English. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on the porch and Kai would tell stories from his childhood. Some funny, some sad, all of them revealing pieces of the culture he'd left behind. Ayla would add her own memories, and together they'd create a kind of oral history of a world that was changing, disappearing, being overwritten by the relentless push of expansion. Rowan listened and remembered. And sometimes when asked, he'd tell stories too. About Missouri, about the farm his family had worked, about the war and what it had cost, though he kept those stories brief. The past didn't need to be dwelt on, just acknowledged and learned from. Sarah visited twice more over the following years, each time bringing news from the outside world. The territory was indeed changing, more settlers, more towns, more railroads cutting through land that had been wild just a decade before. Each visit, Rowan felt the pull of that world a little less. He'd made his choice. This valley, these people, this was where he belonged. On Sarah's last visit, she brought a surprise. A young man rode with her, tall, serious-faced, with the same dark hair and sharp eyes that ran in their family. Rowan, this is James, Sarah said. My son, your nephew. Rowan stared. You have a son. Had him 2 years ago, named him after father. She smiled. Thought it was time you met him. James, all of 16 and trying to look tough, shook Rowan's hand with a grip that was stronger than expected. Ma said you were a war hero, the boy said. Your ma's generous with the truth. She said you saved a captain's life and then disappeared into the desert with an Apache woman and built a life from nothing. James looked around the valley, taking in the cabin, the garden, the careful work of years. That true? More or less. That's pretty heroic, if you ask me. Rowan didn't know what to say to that, but later, watching James talk with Kai about tracking techniques and laugh at Ayla's dry humor, he felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. Not in himself, but in the idea that maybe his nephew was seeing a different version of strength than he'd been raised with. One that didn't involve killing or conquest, but building and choosing and staying when it would have been easier to run. After they left, Ayla found him on the ridge overlooking the valley. Thinking about family, she asked. Yeah. Miss them? Sometimes, but I've got family here too. He looked at her. Better family, maybe. Different family, she corrected. Blood doesn't make you better or worse, just different. She was right, like she usually was about these things. He pulled her close and they stood together watching the sunset paint the rocks gold and red. Do you ever regret it, he asked, leaving your father's people? Choosing this? She was quiet for a long moment. I regret that it had to be a choice, that I couldn't have both. But do I regret choosing you, choosing this life? She shook her head. Never. Not once. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Easy things don't teach you anything. Hard things, building a home, loving someone who's as broken as you are, making peace with the parts of yourself you hate, that's where you learn who you really are. He kissed her forehead. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. He laughed, and the sound echoed across the valley. And for a moment, everything felt perfect. Not because there were no problems, no scars, no ghosts, but because they'd learned to carry those things together. Get. 8 years after the battle, Kai announced he was leaving. They were sitting around the fire after dinner when he said it, casual as mentioning the weather. I have decided to travel, see what else is out there. Rowan and Ayla exchanged glances. For how long? Ayla asked. I do not know. A year, maybe. Maybe longer. He poked at the fire. I am grateful for what we have built here, truly. But I am still young, and there is a world I have never seen. If I do not go now, I fear I never will. Where will you go? Rowan asked. North, I think. Into the mountains. I have heard there are Apache bands there who live differently, who have found ways to adapt without losing themselves. I want to see if that is true, and if it is not, he shrugged, then I will keep looking. You'll come back? Ayla's voice was small. Of course, this is home, but I need to know what else is possible before I can truly choose it. Rowan understood that better than Kai probably realized. He'd done the same thing when he'd left the cavalry, when he'd built his canyon refuge. Sometimes you had to see what you were running from before you could appreciate what you'd found. When do you leave? He asked. Tomorrow, at first light. That night they stayed up late talking, sharing memories, making promises to write, trying not to acknowledge that this was the end of something. The three of them had been a unit for so long that the thought of breaking it apart felt wrong. But it was also necessary. Kai was right. He needed to see what else was out there. Needed to choose this life instead of just accepting it. In the morning, they helped him pack. Supplies, weapons, a good horse. Ayla pressed a bundle of herbs into his hands. For medicine, she said, in case you need it. Thank you, cousin. Rowan gave him a spare rifle and ammunition, in case you run into trouble. I will try not to. They walked him to the valley entrance and watched as he mounted his horse. He looked back once, his face a mixture of excitement and sadness. Take care of each other, he said. We will, Ayla replied. You take care of yourself. I am very good at that. He rode away, and they stood watching until he disappeared into the Badlands. When he was gone, the valley felt bigger, emptier. Just us now, Rowan said. Yeah. Ayla took his hand. Is that enough? He thought about it, really thought about it, and realized that it was. More than enough. Yeah, he said. It is. They walked back to the cabin together, and life continued. Wasak. Kai's letters came sporadically over the next 2 years. He'd found work as a guide in the Northern Territories, helping settlers navigate mountain passes. He'd met other Apache who'd integrated into white society in various ways, some successfully, some not. He'd seen beautiful country and terrible things. He'd fallen in love with a Navajo woman named Ayana, who made him laugh and challenged him to be better. His last letter arrived in the spring of their 10th year in the valley. He'd gotten married. He and Ayana had built a small homestead in the mountains and were expecting a child. He was happy, truly happy. And he wanted Rowan and Ayla to know that what they'd built in the valley, the model of family they'd created, had given him the courage to build his own. Ayla cried when she read it, happy tears this time. He found his place, she said. Yeah, he did. Do you think he'll ever come back? For visits, maybe. But that's his home now, same as this is ours. She folded the letter carefully and set it aside. I'm glad. He deserves happiness. So do you. She looked at him, a smile tugging at her lips. I have it. Right here. That night, lying in bed with Ayla curled against him, Rowan thought about happiness. Real happiness. Not the fleeting kind that came and went with circumstances, but the deep kind that came from knowing exactly where you belonged. He'd spent years thinking he didn't deserve it, that the things he'd done in the war had forfeited his right to peace. But Ayla had taught him something important, that redemption wasn't about earning forgiveness. It was about accepting it when it was offered, and then doing the work to become someone worthy of the gift. He'd done that work. They both had. And the result was this, a life built from scratch in the middle of nowhere, with a woman who saw all his broken pieces and loved him anyway. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 15 years after they'd first arrived in the valley, Sarah visited one last time. She was older now, gray streaking her hair, lines around her eyes from years of smiling. James was with her, a man now, with a wife and a child of his own. They brought gifts, tools, books, news from the world beyond. But more than that, they brought closure. "I'm not coming back after this," Sarah said, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "My health isn't what it was, and the journey's too hard. But I needed to see you one more time. Needed to know you were all right." "I'm more than all right," Rowan said. "I can see that." She looked at Ayla, who was teaching James's son how to skip stones in the creek. "You found what you needed out here. I found what I didn't know I was looking for. Love, purpose, belonging. A reason to wake up that isn't just spite or habit." He smiled. "Love came with it, yeah, but it was the other stuff that mattered most." Sarah reached over and took his hand. "I'm proud of you. I know I never said it before, but I am. You could have let the war destroy you, could have drunk yourself to death or eaten a bullet like so many others did. But you didn't. You survived. And more than that, you built something beautiful from the ruins." Rowan's throat tightened. "I had help." "We all do. The trick is accepting it when it's offered." She squeezed his hand. "Promise me you'll keep going, keep building, keep loving that woman like she's the best thing that ever happened to you." "She is." "Then show her. Every day. Don't take it for granted." "I won't." They sat together until the stars came out, brother and sister who'd traveled different paths but ended up in good places. When it was time for her to leave the next morning, the goodbye was easier than expected. Not because it hurt less, but because they both knew this was right. She rode away with James and his family, and Rowan stood watching until they were gone. Then he turned and walked back to where Ayla was waiting. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how strange life is. How the worst moments can lead to the best ones. How loss can teach you what really matters." He pulled her close. "And how lucky I am that the universe dropped you in my path when it did." She laughed. "Dropped me? I was dying, and you were too stubborn to let me go." "Details. Important details." He kissed her, and she kissed him back. And somewhere in the distance, the creek burbled and the wind sang through the canyon and the valley held them safe. 20 years after the battle, they were still there. The cabin had been expanded again, reinforced and improved until it was something close to permanent. The garden had grown into a proper farm, producing enough food that they could trade surplus with passing travelers for things they couldn't make themselves. The horses had multiplied. They kept a small herd now, breeding them carefully, selling the best ones to settlers who appreciated quality. They'd built a life, a real one, with routines and rhythms and small joys that accumulated into something larger than the sum of their parts. Rowan was older now, gray threading through his hair, his body showing the wear of hard living. But he was strong still, capable, content in ways he'd never imagined possible. Ayla had aged too, laugh lines around her eyes, her hands rough from work, but gentle when they touched his face. She'd become known in the scattered settlements as a healer, someone who knew herbs and medicine, who could set bones and treat fevers. People came from miles around when they needed help, and she never turned anyone away. They'd made peace with their pasts, not forgotten them. You couldn't forget things like that, but learned to carry them without letting them crush what came after. One evening, sitting on the porch they'd built together, Ayla leaned against Rowan and sighed contentedly. "Do you ever think about how it could have gone differently?" she asked. "Sometimes, but not like I used to, not with regret." "What changed?" "I stopped asking what if and started appreciating what is." He looked at her. "This, right here. This is what I was supposed to find, even if the path to get here was ugly, especially because the path was ugly," she corrected. "If it had been easy, we wouldn't appreciate it, wouldn't know how rare this is." She was right. They'd both lost so much: family, belonging, innocence. But in losing those things, they'd found something more valuable: each other, themselves, a life built on choice rather than obligation. "I love you," he said. "I know, you tell me every day. Want to make sure you don't forget." "I won't. Ever." She tilted her head up and kissed him softly. You're stuck with me, Rowan Vance, for however long we've got. Good. I wouldn't want it any other way. They sat together as the sun set, two people who'd survived hell and built heaven from the ashes, and watched the desert paint itself in colors that had no names. The valley held them safe. The stars came out one by one, and in the silence between heartbeats, there was peace. Not the kind that came from avoiding conflict or running from pain, but the kind that came from facing it head on, making the hard choices, and refusing to quit even when quitting made sense. They'd earned this. Every scar, every fight, every moment of doubt. It had all led here. To home. To love. To the simple truth that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. And they'd stayed. Through everything, they'd stayed. And in the staying, they'd found something worth all the loss that came before. They'd found each other. And that made all the difference.